Good morning, everybody. Chief Constable, welcome to you and your team and all of those joining us online for this October accountability session. Could I also take this opportunity to welcome Colin McGrath, who has joined the board as the new SDLP political member. Colin, you're very welcome. Thank you for your accountability report, Chief Constable, which has been restyled to support the new performance reports to the board on progress against the policing plan between 2025 and 2030. The policing plan sets the strategic direction of how the board and the PSNI want to deliver policing in Northern Ireland over the next 5 years. And there are three key areas ensuring that the service is victim focused, community focused, and it is workforce focused. We spent considerable time developing meaningful indicators to assist in monitoring performance, as well as introducing a new reporting regime that will allow the board and the wider public to be informed on the progress that is being made. Today, we receive the first of these reports, which looks at outcome 1, that the PSNI is victim focused. This outcome looks at areas that affect the most vulnerable in the community, those subjected to hate crime, to violence against women and girls, child exploitation, and domestic abuse. Since April, through the board's committees, we have received reports and updates from senior officers on some of the indicators that support this outcome. So while it is still early into the lifespan of the 5-year policing plan, the first part of today's meeting in public will be spent on outcome 1 of the policing plan, and then we will move to other issues. So if I can invite you and your team, Chief Constable, to present your report on outcome 1, then I know members will have some questions, and then we will move on to topical issues into our normal monthly meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to everybody, all the members and everybody in the room, and of course those watching online. As you've already explained, Chair, we're following a different format this month, both in today's meeting and in my monthly accountability report. The report's been redesigned to align more closely with the policing plan and give our reporting to you a clearer focus on performance, evidence and outcomes. It's only right that the board examines and indeed focuses upon the strategic performance of the policing plan. I always welcome the various and varied questions at our meetings, but we do need to apply a high-level focus on our performance against the priorities of the plan at this forum. The new approach, with the December board focus on outcome 2 of being community focused, and the February 2026 board being focused on outcome 3, which is workforce focused, are very welcome developments in my view around our accountability structures. And accountability is not merely a statutory requirement. It's essential to building trust and confidence in policing. Through this new approach, the board and the public will be able to see clearly the progress that we're making, the challenges that we face, and the absolute dedication of officers and staff to continue to improve and get this right. I'm personally delighted that we're starting today with outcome 1, which is about the PSNI being victim focused. This for me is a fundamental pillar to achieve excellent policing and is especially close to my heart and my policing philosophy. Helping victims should be at the centre of what we do and is the reason that most of us join the police. It provides a pathway to securing trust and confidence, and delivered well with professionalism and empathy is a key pillar to successful policing. My own experiences in Northern Ireland of meeting many victims from across all the varied sectors of those who are victims of the Troubles, who've not been engaged with and provided the information that they legally and morally were entitled to. That's the driver as to why I wanted this pivotal outcome in the policing plan. We have a professional duty to be there for victims and do all we can to help them overcome what's happened to them. Meeting victims and families whose experiences were of resistance to answers being provided to them, of their reasonable and fair questions about a catastrophic Troubles-related event that had befallen them, was a disappointing and previously unknown experience to me. Many of those failures were related to the complexities and the sensitivities of our troubled past. But such intransigence and legal posturing and delay have no place in a police service that is victim focused. We'll provide information to victims and indeed to wider society when it is in the public interest to do so, rather than the organisational interest not to. That's the hallmark of a progressive, outcomes focused and trusted police service. People know my position on the proper disclosure of information to victims and the need for open and transparent policing. These will underpin our approach to all of the priorities in the policing plan. Being victim focused is not something we can achieve in isolation. We need to adopt a team and collaborative approach across all sectors. We'll strive to be an exemplar in supporting victims and helping them rebuild their lives. And I have seen countless examples of where our neighbourhood and response officers do this day and daily. I've also met many victims who've eulogised over the support and policing service that they've received that's positively changed their lives. I very much look forward to seeing progress in this fundamental and critically important area. So our Deputy Chief Constable has a strategic lead for Outcome 1. Although, as with all of our policing approach, we apply a team PSNI approach to these issues. Everything we do collectively. It's important to stipulate that the 5-year policing plan is new, and our performance against the outcomes of the plan will develop over the forthcoming months and years, as will our understanding of how we're doing. So with that, I'll hand you over to Bobby.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Apologies in advance. I think, like some people in the room, I might have a bit of a cold, so I will try my best not to cough and splutter my way through this. Chair, as you and the Chief have pointed out, this is the inaugural Performance Accountability Report. In terms of our reporting, it's still very much a work in progress, but it's good to have finally commenced this work to further improve our accountability. Through Outcome 1, we've collectively committed to ensuring that all victims of crime are treated with compassion and respect, and that they receive the very highest quality of service and are satisfied with the outcome of their case. As per the policing plan, the report before the board today presents our initial self-assessment against Outcome 1's 6 agreed impact measures. The impact of progress, as well as the detail of ongoing initiatives, case studies, and recent positive court outcomes. Unfortunately, because of the scheduling of this particular outcome, coming just 6 months into what is intended to be a 5-year policing plan, and our requirement to use only officially validated statistical information in public, our attempts to provide you with a contemporary and meaningful statistical progress update against the 25 to 30 policing plan have been frustrated somewhat. Whilst we may be 6 months into the reporting period, we actually have just 3 months of 2025-26 validated statistical data for much of the impact measures. For example, 1.1 violence against women and girls and 1.3 child criminal exploitation, and only 4 months of data for impact measures 1.2 domestic abuse and 1.4 hate crime. And we're also having to rely upon data from 2023-24 for outcome 1.6 on recorded crimes and for all the reported attrition rates across the various impacts. Consequently, many of the year-to-year comparisons that have been provided are for just the first quarter of the respective financial years and are therefore far from a complete picture. For example, they either don't take account of or are potentially impacted by seasonality and significant offence. And this is probably most notable in the area of hate-motivated incidents and crimes, given what happened in Ballymena in the first quarter of this financial year. Broadly speaking, however, the available information shows very few statistically significant changes. Some of the more significant percentage changes as well can be explained by changes in what are very small overall numbers of incidents and are therefore capable of being significantly skewed by even a change of a few incidents. Whilst we're limited publicly in terms of the statistical information that we can provide, we will, of course, continue to provide more detailed contemporary management information and operational figures in either the private session or the board's committees. Indeed, only 2 of the 6 indicators that we're talking about for Outcome 1 have to date been reported through Performance Committee, and with the remaining 4 scheduled to be reported during the remainder of this year, there should be plenty of opportunity for us to provide the board with a contemporary, if unofficial, performance snapshot. The RAG status that members can see, and they will hopefully be aware, is a self-assessment, and that's being carried out by the PSNI's chief officer leads for each of the respective indicators. So in this case, it's by ACC's Beck, Henderson and McNally. The self-assessment process was, as agreed with the board, against the available impact measures for each area, and the agreed 4-scale rating of good progress, adequate progress, limited progress, or not achieving progress. Unfortunately, some of the agreed measures for each impact were dependent upon the availability of either the Northern Ireland Policing Plan survey or benchmark data against our most similar forces, both of which are not yet currently available for this plan or not considered as suitable for comparison just yet. Members will see that the self-assessment for the 6 measures contains 5 adequate progress ratings and 1 good progress rating. Like the application of any RAG status, it has to be stressed that this is subjective. However, we have sought to be as objective as possible, based again on the limited performance information currently available to us, but also what has been achievable against our funding and resourcing situation. Members have, of course, had the benefit from the report of us having set out the significant amount of work that's ongoing under each of the impact areas. And I'll later invite Davy and Anthony to talk a bit more about the highlights under each of their respective areas. But I thought it might just be helpful and beneficial to set out what I intend to do overall as deputy to help deliver this outcome. So firstly, I've assumed the role of the victim's champion. Now, previously, this would have been the responsibility for the Assistant Chief Constable for Justice. But really, given just how cross-cutting the theme victim focus is for us and how central it is to the organisation's performance and the policing plan, I think it's right that overall responsibility and accountability ultimately rests with me. With the policing plan having been finalised, I'm now in the process of working with our performance and insights team to adapt our existing performance management framework to support continuous improvement around the entirety of what we are now looking at as the victim journey. This month, for example, our Service Performance Board will for the first time be structured around the journey and will focus not just on the policing plan and its measures, but also HMIC FRS's 2023 to 2025 Peel Assessment Framework, which contains a number of characteristics of what good looks like in terms of providing a service for victims of crime. In terms of the victim journey, for us, it's really a 5-stage process, and that starts with our efforts to improve victim and community trust and confidence. Now, obviously, there's an overlap here with Outcome 2 on our collective community focus for safe, engaged communities with confidence in policing. Maybe it's obvious at the state, but if people don't trust us, if they don't have confidence in policing, they just won't pick up the phone. They won't report or tell us what's happening, and they won't feel reassured. And figures from the most recent Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, unfortunately, again, that data only brings us up to 2023, suggest that perhaps as much as 40% of all crime goes unreported. And we know that this is even more likely for crimes that involve domestic motivations or are sexual in nature. Members will hopefully be aware of a number of specific ongoing pieces of work which have been overseen to address signal issues and concerns, like victim and witness immigration status and dealing with hate displays, both of which are now in their final phases. These are key to preventing or overcoming any chilling effect on engaging and reporting to the police, in particular for minority communities and vulnerable victims. Moving on then in the journey, when victims do report, first contact is absolutely critical. That first phone call, online report or interaction with one of our teams is the first in a series of moments of truth that can set the tone for everything that follows. And it's really from here onwards that we need to gain better insights and understanding about our performance and how in particular this might be impacting upon attrition. It's about making sure that the first experience is the right one for the individual victim, and that's why we're continuing to innovate to provide victims with a greater choice about how they report, whether that's by phone, online, in person or virtually. Then we look at initial attendance, and this is where our response has to not just be timely, but consistently characterised by compassion, courtesy, dignity and respect. The existing evidence from our victim satisfaction text message survey indicates that more than 8 out of 10 victims report having been treated with fairness and respect in terms of their interaction with our police officers and staff. But the journey doesn't stop there, of course. Victims want and are entitled, in line with the Victim Charter, to be kept informed. And in terms of victims update, while our compliance with our 10-day victim update target has been consistently good, always in the high 90s, the available data, again, contained within the report you have before you today on victim satisfaction, specifically on contact and information on progress of cases, remains stubbornly at 55% and somewhere between 63 and 67% respectively. This suggests that whilst we're hitting the target in terms of the compliance, we're potentially missing the point in terms of providing a quality and timely update. Now, there are gaps that we want to address in terms of our understanding of victim satisfaction. For safety reasons, we don't contact our most vulnerable victims, including victims of domestic and sexual abuse, by text message. So we need to find ways of better understanding all victims' needs and experiences, and that will be absolutely key as we go forward. Finally, we not only want to do all that we can to keep victims engaged with the criminal justice process, but we also want to focus on improving the outcomes themselves, and that can only be done by working very closely with stakeholders and our criminal justice partners to ensure that we deliver on our collective commitments as made in the Northern Ireland's Victims Charter. In support of our efforts to gain better insights and to ensure that the voice of victims helps us to identify areas where we can continuously improve, working with the Victims Commissioner, Geraldine Hanna, and our strategic community engagement team, we've organised a reference engagement and listening event, which is going to be themed on the victim journey, and that's going to take place in a couple of weeks' time on Tuesday, the 14th of October. We've had great uptake for that event. We expect to have over 70 stakeholders in the room, along with 30 police officers from various aspects of our business. And that will give us an opportunity to hear firsthand from across the entire victim sector. Throughout the course of the day, we'll be providing short updates on the work that's already underway at each stage of the journey to improve the victim's experience of our service. And then we'll be having targeted discussions with the stakeholders and advocates about how we can further improve our service going forward, working together. I know an invite has already been extended to members of the board, and I hope that you'll be able to join us on the day for that. As well as the general commitments and this overarching work to providing the best possible service and outcomes to all victims, Outcome 1, of course, seeks to specifically examine our effectiveness in a number of key areas and key programmes of work, which centre on those who we sadly know are most likely to fall victim to crime and who, under a variety of factors, have and experience higher levels of vulnerability and impact. These include women and girls, domestic violence and abuse victims, children who are criminally exploited, and those who are the victims of hate crime. The rationale for our decision to make violence against women and girls and domestic crime organisational priorities is again validated through the available data, which demonstrates that these groups continue to account for somewhere in the region of between 22 and 27% of all victim-based crime. At this point, I'd like to invite Davy just to talk about what he sees as being some of the highlights under sections 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3, and then we'll hear a bit more from Anthony.
Thank you, Deputy. Good morning, folks. And conscious quite a bit of ground has been covered there already, and I just wanted to highlight a few issues. Firstly, it's important that we are here again emphasising and focusing on violence against women and girls. And we have just seen the completion of year 3 of our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan. So another important milestone in terms of our progress in this regard. And we've seen, I think you would agree, significant progress over the last 3 years in this regard. And again, I would emphasise the fact that our action plan was initiated ahead of the Executive Office ending violence against women and girls strategy, but we are now absolutely aligned and keen to continue that work with the Executive Office in respect of what is clearly a priority across government. As the Deputy said, we have seen reductions in the overall reporting of violence against women and girls crimes over the reporting period. And again, to give you an indication around that we're seeing this financial year a reduction of around 4%. What does that mean? It means there's around 900 fewer victims of violence against women and girls this year compared to previous years. We are also seeing, if we compare that against the 5-year baseline, again, a continued trend in reduction in terms of the reporting of those offences of around 9%. We're also seeing the outcome figures sustained over that period with very marginal gains, a slight increase in the number of persons charged or summons in respect of those offences. And again, marginal reductions in the attrition rates. So those are the people, the victims that aren't supportive of a police investigation, which I think is encouraging at this stage. I would emphasise the information that we published just last weekend in respect of the end of year 3 of our action plan. That highlights over 5,000 arrests for the new legislation. That's the new offences around domestic abuse, stalking and non-fatal strangulation. I think that's really, really significant, and again emphasises the proactive investigative activity that we are undertaking to protect women and girls right across Northern Ireland. What does that mean? Again, that means on average each month 84 arrests in respect of the domestic abuse offence, 19 arrests for the stalking offence, and over 70 arrests for non-fatal strangulation, which is quite significant right across Northern Ireland. But it's not just about the statistics. At an operational level, there's significant work has been undertaken over this period. I've mentioned the VOG action plan. The last year of that, we completed 6 of our 21 actions. We are now reviewing those actions with the view to, again, continue to challenge ourselves as an organisation and the impact we can make on this key area for us. But we have ongoing work in terms of our vetting processes, again, against reviews in respect of misconduct, dignity at work policies, and organisational learning in respect of violence against women and girls. We are again reviewing our alignment with national bodies to ensure that we continue to challenge ourselves, but also tap into best practice in respect of these areas of our day-to-day activity. And we continue to develop bespoke flagging systems, specifically around elements such as child criminal exploitation and child sexual exploitation, alongside collaboration and engagement with the social media platforms for, again, to emphasise that early identification in respect of offending behaviours and patterns. And we have a real focus on continued improvement through our involvement in multi-agency reviews, partnerships, and again, that data-driven insight to ensure that we protect victims right across this area of business. We do continue to build trust and confidence in policing. We've talked about the vetting processes, the statement of intent around standards that was again recently refreshed for all our officers and staff. We continue to deliver continuous professional development in respect of violence against women and girls. The Power to Change campaign, which is now an award-winning campaign recognised nationally in respect of the real efforts to make a difference at a societal level, but also at an internal level across our officers and staff as well. We have over 6,000 of our staff have been trained in revised domestic abuse policies and procedures, 3,000 officers trained in the new stalking and non-fatal strangulation offences. So significant time, effort and work going into ensuring that our people are best able to respond to these needs and issues as we move forward. And partnership is key to this. Again, significant partnership work ongoing with White Ribbon, Nexus, Women's Aid and other groups to ensure that we both challenge ourselves but also work on that multi-agency response and capability. We continue to look at some areas that have not been progressed totally, so domestic abuse protection orders and notices, and I know as a board you have sought updates around that work. And we have recently visited an area in Manchester for, again, further learning, and we are now at the point of the initiation of a pilot around DAPOs and DAPNs, which will commence shortly. Domestic homicide reviews, again, our involvement in and contribution to those reviews continues, but also the learning coming from those reviews being applied across the service under my leadership in crime department. But it's not just around crime department right across the organisation. We are about to launch, after significant work and time and effort in the preparation phase, for our Project Vigilant, which will see uniformed and plainclothes officers deployed across Northern Ireland in respect of the nighttime economy to identify that perpetrator behaviour, and that will be formally launched this month. We're seeing our neighbourhood teams involved in safe walk and talk events. Again, neighbourhood teams with community groups, with women's groups, sharing information, concerns, and then responding to those at a local level. We're seeing significant work with partners around safer socialising, work with TransLink around the Ask for Angela, Project Vigilant, as I've mentioned, the Nighttime Safety Charter. Again, working to improve and reduce the opportunities for predator behaviour. And again, looking with some of our academic partners around new legislation and new issues around spiking and other elements that we can continue to apply to this area of business, all of which I think adds to that not only statistical direction of travel around VOG, but ensures that we continue to reach into those communities and reach into areas of concern and respond to those in a really positive manner. If I can touch on domestic abuse, again, and there will be a crossover in terms of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. But again, over the reporting period, domestic offence rates reported to police have reduced, while we have maintained a real focus on domestic abuse as a service priority right across PSNI, with all parts of the service contributing to that. And again, there has been relative falls in terms of reported crimes, while attrition rates are reducing in those areas as well. In respect of child criminal exploitation, quite frankly, this is a form of child abuse, which occurs where an individual or a group takes advantage of an imbalance of power to coerce, control, manipulate or deceive a child or young person under the age of 18 into some form of criminal activity. And while crime recording in respect of children is down, it still accounts for around 10% of all victim-based crimes. So there remains much work to be done in that regard. But as an organisation, again, we have a real focus on child criminal exploitation moving forward. And we have taken significant steps over the last 12 months to place that focus around CCE. This has been supported by a specific CCE strategic workshop, which again looks at how we can develop credible and sustainable response to the issues. We have, through the service executive team, adopted an agreed definition around what child criminal exploitation is, and I think that forms a clear basis around that strategic approach, which then helps deliver that operational response to that. And again, we're in the development of bespoke and specific training and awareness around the issues, with increased visibility of child criminal exploitation across our PSNI systems and across our governance. But there's much work to be done around the multi-agency space in regard to CCE as well. So we continue to strengthen our response to CCE through investigations, but also through collaborations with partner agencies. And all our response to CCE is managed within existing child protection frameworks and with a real partnership with the Health and Social Care Trust. We continue to contribute to the CCE action plan, jointly led by the Department of Health and the Department of Justice in that regard. And again, we continue to work with the Education Authority around Operation Encompass, where we have developed that information sharing agreement in respect of a number of issues impacting on both domestic abuse. And from that, I think there's real opportunities to strengthen that and develop that into the area of child criminal exploitation as well. So that's just some headlines around some of those areas. Deputy, I'm happy to hand back to you now.
That's great, Debbie, thanks. I'm just going to invite Anthony then maybe to share some detail in particular with us on the My PSNI portal, which you'll see referenced under section 1.5 around providing a high quality service to victims. That's one area in particular that we hope might positively impact on victim satisfaction with contact and information on progress in cases, particularly. But I'll ask him if there's anything else he wants to cover as well.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Deputy, and thank you, members, for the opportunity today to update you in relation to outcome 1. Specifically looking at 1.5 and 1.6, there's no doubt, as with most of the measures, delivering a high quality service and effective outcomes go hand in hand. Indeed, for many people, that high quality service is that they get an effective outcome. But it is also important to say that that outcome doesn't always necessarily have to be a criminal justice outcome. There are many victims who that's not the answer they want. And again, looking back, my time in public protection branch, you look at things such as domestic abuse. For many people, it's just being able to escape that environment where they are being coercively controlled and be able to live a happy life in society. But that's not to say, of course, that where there are opportunities for criminal justice outcomes for that or other offences that we don't pursue them.
I think in terms of looking at the 1.5 specifically, as was mentioned by the deputy, the 4 questions that are asked, the 2 really of concern are questions 2 and questions 3. Questions 1 and questions 4 in relation to treat it with fairness and respect, and the would encourage a friend to report are good in terms of the satisfaction rates for those. They've remained broadly steady over the 5-year trend, at over 82% and at 75% respectively. But I think I'll just maybe touch on the how well I'm being kept informed of the progress of my case and provide some context on that, as the deputy used the word stubbornly in the mid-50s, which we'd all agree with. I think it's important to highlight that the progress of a case, well, that's just not beyond the control. That's beyond the control of police alone, and that's not an abdication of responsibility. It is just to highlight that this is a whole systems approach. Yes, that first point of contact may well be with police, but it requires police, the public prosecution service, the courts, and the judiciary all to work together to provide that that outcome and that progress of the case along those various streams that it will touch on. The main body that helps oversee our approach to that and provide that coordination is the Criminal Justice Board. The Criminal Justice Board is chaired by the Justice Minister, and members of it include the Chief Constable, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Director of Courts, and also the Lady Chief Justice. Under the oversight of this group, there has been £20 million allocated over the next 4 years for a project entitled Speeding Up Justice, which is a subgroup of that Criminal Justice Board. And I think we'd all agree that speeding up justice is what will help people in terms of ensuring that they're satisfied about the progress of their case. The Speeding Up Justice programme has a number of work streams, and again, I just think it would be important to highlight to the board what those are. There are 5 of them. The first one is about early engagement. So that's early engagement both between the police and the Public Prosecution Service, but then also the Public Prosecution Service and the Defence to get cases to court as quickly, as effectively and efficiently as possible. In terms of the PPS and police interface in relation to that, we have set up a system as of last November in relation to what we're referring to as gatekeepers. And in effect, what that is specialists who, when an investigating officer completes a file, it will go to that gatekeeper who will look at the quality and quantity of the evidence that's within that file to make sure that it meets the requisite standards for that offence. And we really adopt a right first time approach. That's then mirrored when it goes to the PPS, who similarly will have gatekeepers who again will make sure that they're content from their side that that case is ready to go forward to the courts as quickly and efficiently as possible to ensure that that is a speedy justice approach. We have a team of 6 gatekeepers, but through the additional funding, the transformational funding the department has received, that's going to be expanded to 10 in the coming weeks. The primary focus of files that we look at, we can't look at them all. We have to prioritise, but the primary focus, as you would expect, is on those more serious offences, and particularly domestic abuse, which makes up over 20% of reported crime to police. So those are the focus for our gatekeepers. So that's early engagement. The board will be aware of the second work stream in relation to committal reform. This is something that's has been discussed for quite a number of years in Northern Ireland in relation to being able to take matters directly to the Crown Court and avoiding it initially going to the Magistrates Court, again, speeding up that justice for those most serious offences. The go-live date for committal reform is the 26th of November 2026, and the PPS and the police are involved in that with our courts colleagues. The third group is digital reform, which is really about ensuring that where at all possible across the criminal justice sector, we're working collaboratively to ensure that we have joined up IT, joined up solutions, so that that information flow that we need from the police right through to the courts and back is as seamless as possible and as cost effective as possible. The fourth work stream is the one the police lead on. The other ones are led by other agencies. The one the police lead on is out of courts disposal. The purpose of out of courts disposal is to take matters which, with the victim's view taken into consideration, may not need to go to the court. So it is generally the lower level offending type offences, the low level public order, traffic type matters, and so on. The main work of that has included a process that's called no-file decisions. So what has been introduced just over a year ago now is that where there is insufficient evidence in a case, a streamlined file is done by the investigating officer. That there is an inspector within the police who will look at that, and if it's deemed that there's insufficient evidence, then it won't go to the PPS, and that streamlined file will be the decision-making point that there is no further action taken by police. This is supported by a working group, and including voluntary members and the Victims Commissioner, to ensure that everything we're doing is with the lens of ensuring that we provide the right victim focus. For me, this is important because what it allows us to do by dealing with those matters where there isn't evidence, that we can focus and really build the files in the more serious cases and ensure that victims are kept updated. We've also looked to ensure that we can get our files in as quickly as possible, looking at things and use of automation. We have introduced a voice-to-text process whereby for interviews, that is now transcribed voice-to-text. It will always require a human eye to check that because automation may not always get things right, particularly around things like someone's name or a street address where it might struggle. But again, really just helping us to do these things as efficiently and effectively as possible in support of getting cases through the court system and minimising the trauma to victims as much as possible. The board will also be aware at the minute, in relation to out of court's disposal, there's a consultation on expanding penalty notices for disorder. In terms of the sliding scale, we have community resolution notices, which are in effect, I would describe it as the lowest level of a sanction that someone can receive for low-level offending. That can include if they've stolen something minor, they pay back the money. If there's been an allegation of a low-level type common assault, they apologise to the person that's involved and so on. And that's with a view to keeping those matters out of the court, but also getting the resolution that the victim wants at the earliest and quickest opportunity. We then have the court system for those more serious matters. So in the middle is the consideration of expansion of penalty notice of disorder. So again, it will be for things such as theft, public order offences, those type of, again, lower level things, traffic offences. I know there's been some discussion around assaults on police being involved in this, and I maybe just want to touch on that. Assaults on police has been a community resolution notice option for circa 10 years. And of course, that will be for the very lowest level where there's assaults on police, maybe a minor push or an officer maybe not even pushed, but in fear of being pushed, which is in of itself common assault. So that has been a disposal option for a number of years. But from there really only is the court process then for any other type of assaults that aren't deemed necessary. A penalty notice for disorder is something that I would describe as in the middle. So again, if it is quite a low-level assault, maybe a very minor push, and the officer is content, then that can be dealt with by way of a penalty notice to that individual. So from a policing perspective, we would support that additional option and army in our toolkit of penalty notices of disorder for those lower-level offending. I should also mention that in addition then to the Criminal Justice Board and those work streams that I have discussed, there's also the Working Together Programme Board. That's a programme board between the police and the PPS where we look at all of the things that the Criminal Justice Board also deals with, but manage those on a tactical level to ensure that we're working as efficiently and effectively as possible in support of getting the right outcomes for victims. I'll move on next to question 3, and I'm satisfied with my contact with the PSNI. For me, certainly, contact with the police can obviously happen in many ways. It can be meeting a bobby on the beat at a community meeting and so on, but primarily it is through our telephone system in terms of 999 and 101. Arguably for me, in my portfolio as Justice, the most important thing is that we get that first contact absolutely right. We all know the figures, and again, the Deputy touched on it about the number of times or the amount of crime that's unreported. We know, and I know, that domestic abuse, many victims can take over 35 times before they'll contact police. So it is so important that that first contact is professional, courteous, and gives them the support that they absolutely need. In terms of how we're governing, how we'll try to improve that satisfaction level in terms of contact is through a formal structure of the Digital Citizens Board within policing. That's something that I chair. So I'm looking at anything that we can do in terms of that contact to see what we can do better. As I mentioned, traditionally, people contact us through 999 and 101. The board will be aware that we expanded this over a year ago to including online reporting. You'll see in the pack that online reporting has progressed. It was originally 4% when we first introduced it, but it is now close to 8%. That's to help people, because not everyone necessarily wants to speak to a police officer or a police staff member, so it's important that they have that suite of options to contact the police in a manner that suits them. It's important to highlight as well that when people do report online, and over 80% of those cases, they have a response to say that their case is being dealt with and it's been acknowledged within 15 minutes. So it is a very efficient and effective system. When a member of the public now contacts police, we now, as of earlier this year, can tell them what the wait time will be. That's important. Can tell them that it's going to be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it may be. And that, again, will help that member of the public decide, do they wish to wait? Or if not, then we can then refer them to the online reporting option by selecting a number as part of that call. So just, again, expanding the suite of options for them. The Deputy specifically mentioned the My Victims portal. This is an important step for us in terms of how people can contact the police. On there now, there are two things that people can ask for and request their firearms licence through that system, but then also, and really importantly, is the victim update and relevant to today's conversation. So a member of the public can now register on the My Victim portal. Where they have a case reference number, they can log into that case reference number and ask the investigating officer for an update. The investigating officer or supervisor will respond to that then as quickly and efficiently as possible. So again, that saves people from having to dial into 101 to ask for a victim update. They can now just do that from the comfort of their own home at a time and place that suits them. We will be looking to expand the victim portal over the coming months and years for things such as where people need to make online payments for reports, for example, for road traffic collisions, and so on. So we'll look to expand that as we go forward to, again, make the victim a member of the public's journey and contact with the police as seamless and straightforward as possible. Going forward as well, we are in the early stages of exploring things like such as chatbots. So again, rather than phone 101, if somebody wants to know what time an inquiry office is open or the email address for a certain officer or staff member, again, those things can be progressed via online and automated tools to save them time on 101. And then finally, I just want to mention our virtual officer attendance team, which again, Ryan has spoken to some of the committees about. Again, this is a great opportunity whereby if someone calls us and there is a level of crime that can be dealt with via the phone or now through the video or the virtual officer attendance team, that member of the public can take that option. If that member of the public wants police to call with them, we still will. But again, maybe not everyone wants police to come to our house at that certain date and time. So we can schedule those and arrange those at a time and place that's convenient to make sure that that contact with the police is as seamless as possible and has the best interests of the member of the public at heart. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Chair, I think as you can hear, there's an absolutely vast programme of work ongoing here, not resting on our laurels or accepting the status quo, trying to improve things for victim in terms of the experience and outcomes. I just want to give the last word on this to the Chief Constable and specifically to allow him to comment on how through our collective leadership we're aiming to create a victim-focused culture within the organisation.
Thanks, Bobby. I thought this would probably come out through questions, but one thing I talked to the team about, that what we're trying to achieve here won't be defined by process or performance or data. It's defined by how you live and breathe this. It's defined by leadership. Since I've been here, we've had some of the most appalling series of disorder that I've experienced in 40 plus years of policing. And we've gone to see those victims when we got it wrong. We've sat in their houses. We've gone to community meetings. We know there's been some iconic cases here where things haven't gone as any of us would have wished in violence against women and girls. There's the incredible tragedy of the Katie Simpson case. There are other cases where there have been concerns by families that we didn't get things right. So we don't duck any of that. We've been to see those families. We've listened to those concerns. And that shaped, and there's been a lot of talking from this side of the table for this particular first tranche of outcome one being looked at, so you understand what we're doing. The next time we do this, there'll be a lot of questions about where our data is, I think. But this is about living and breathing and doing this. And when we see our recruits for the first time, when they first come in, that first day, I see them and I talk about why we are victim focused. When we have the attestation with all their families there, which often the chair or the deputy chair or members of the board will go to, we talk about the importance of victim focus, but just not as a strapline. We talk about what sits behind it, complexity in people's lives, the challenges of living in today's society where we've left far too many people behind. We talk about it at Team PSNI, a number of you have been there, and we actually bring that to life with victims coming and talking about their own experiences. This is something that you have to live and breathe to really see the difference. And that's what we're trying to do around all of these outcomes. So it will take some time, but I'm confident if you spoke to any of our staff and asked them what the organisation is about, they will talk already about being victim focused and explain what that means to them. They'll talk about being communities focused and again explain what that means to them. And they'll talk about being workforce focused. So Rome wasn't built in a day, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. And forthcoming board meetings, you'll hold our hands to the flame about how successful or not we're managing to do that. Okay.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable and Anthony and David. We absolutely welcome your commitment to taking up the Victims Champion. That's very encouraging. And before we move to questions, David, you mentioned the sheer volume of the numbers of arrests. That's commendable in the good work that's going on, but it actually paints a very dark picture of areas of our society that so many people are being arrested for these horrible crimes. So thank you for letting us know and giving us an update on what you have done to date. Got 4 or 5 questions on this subject. I'm going to start with Brendan on crime trends and criminal justice outcomes.
Thanks, Chair. Just for moving to the question, maybe just a bit of additional context in terms of reporting against the plan, in terms of how the policing board will approach the monitoring of delivery of the policing plan. Each of the outcomes have a number of key performance indicators. And in relation to this outcome, in terms of being victim focused, the key performance metrics are, first of all, trends. Is it rising or decreasing? The second is outcomes. Are we achieving criminal justice outcomes for those reported crimes? The third, which links into outcomes very clearly, is the level of attrition rates. In other words, we can't get a criminal justice outcome because the victim doesn't support the prosecution. And in terms of confidence in policing, I think that's a key metric. And then following on from attrition rates, how satisfied are victims with the service they've received from the police? And finally, in relation to victim satisfaction, are we, as a police service, complying with the victim's charter? So those are the metrics, and against each of those there will be a RAG status that has been referred to by the Deputy Chief Constable in terms of good progress, adequate, limited, no progress. In terms of these interim reports, that will be allocated by the senior team within PSNI, but when it comes to the year-end report, those RAG statuses will be verified by the board more formally. However, in terms of today, as has already been mentioned, we're only 6 months into a 5-year plan. And not only that, some of the statistics we have are actually only for 3 months. So really what we're looking at today is the baseline, so the starting position that we want to move forward from, and monitor performance over the next 5 years in terms of that starting position that we're seeing today. So with that context, my sort of first question is that the priority areas within victim focus of violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, child criminal exploitation, hate crime, are there any emerging trends or increases in any of those? So how is child criminal exploitation sort of being seen? What is the key hot area there? or in relation to hate crime and so forth? And then my second question is, so criminal justice outcome generally has sat at 30% for the past 5 years. What are the challenges in terms of improving that? Are there any specific initiatives, or are there barriers to seeing an increase in that 30% criminal justice outcome to reported crime?
I'll probably be very briefly make a couple of comments. I'm conscious of time, and I know we've got a second limb of this meeting to do. Dealing with your second point first, it's something I think, with regards to what I've already said, it's about getting the trust and confidence of people to report the crimes in the first place. A lot of people involved in what I would call these hateful offences, whether that's behaviours around violence against women or girls, or racism or homophobia, attacking people because of difference. A lot of those victims do not feel they have a voice. A lot of them, there may be language challenges, there may be cultural issues where they don't feel that they can actually speak and trust the police, because that would be a challenge from countries that they've come from, especially our new and emerging communities in Northern Ireland. So through our strategic engagement team and through the work that I think we've done, and I'm sure it happened well before I arrived, but certainly since I've been here, the interaction with people at this table, with communities, it's not a hierarchical thing, this. It sets the example of what we're trying to do to make sure we get that trust and confidence. And we've been to some challenging meetings after the disorder where people have been extremely upset, but mainly not about policing, about housing issues, about support, wider social care. They've actually been incredibly supportive about our initial response to those crimes. But what it showed me is that things have happened for a number of years and they've never reported it. And that is something we've got to fix. I do just want to deal with the criminal justice system as well, because here we still, and I know there's a date set for it, but it still feels to me really wrong that we still have a criminal justice process that is so slow, that we still have a process with regards to committal proceedings that don't allow us to progress criminal justice as you would elsewhere. Legislation has changed, but we're taking too long, and there is a date, of course, but to achieve that. Because again, the longer people wait for justice, the more likely that they'll step away from the process, and understandably so, because perpetrators get bail because they're waiting for their trial for so long. There are so many contributing factors to this. But what I think you've heard today is that all of the things that are impacting on our ability to get the trust and confidence, to get that reporting increased, because I worry when reports go down. That doesn't mean crime's going down. That might mean that there's a confidence issue with people coming to us, and we're not complacent about that. So everything that we think is a cause for concern has been factored into our policing response. But some of this is going to take some time. But I better, because Bobby, I know, has been doing a lot of work on this. I'll hand over to Bobby.
Yeah, maybe just pick up a few bits. Brendan would probably be in danger of repeating an awful lot of what we've already said, because really the two big objectives here are about improving the victim's experience and the outcomes. And virtually everything that we're doing is focused on either, or in fact both of those two areas. In terms of better understanding the barriers, again, we're not making any assumptions that we fully understand and appreciate that. And that's really what the purpose of the real event in the middle of this month is going to be about, is hearing from stakeholders and advocates firsthand what they are experiencing and what victims are telling them in terms of our systems and our processes that might be, for example, contributing to the factors around attrition. I talked about it. We have very limited victim satisfaction data at the minute. I think typically about 16% of the eligible victims complete that. So it's limited even in terms of giving you a proper and full understanding. And that's before you take into the fact that we don't go to the most vulnerable victims with a text message for obvious reasons. So part of the conversation that we want to have later this month as well with stakeholders is how we get a much richer picture, in particular around the most vulnerable victims, around what the potential barriers and inhibitors would be to them continuing on their journey through the criminal justice process. So to make again the point Anthony made as well, like we are the police, and we can at times be guilty of taking a view that we want to lock everybody up. Okay, but you'll be glad to hear we're more developed in our thinking than that these days, and we do recognise that there are a number of alternative ways of achieving a victim-centred outcome and approach. So again, we don't want to lose sight of that either in terms of our pursuit of performance, in particular around the number of people charged in report. In terms of the trends, I mean, I mentioned it there, the available information largely, even with the 5-year trend, we're not seeing significant change in terms of what we're dealing with. So we're confident again, and that's been reflected even in our strategic priorities around many of these themes having remained the same now for 2 to 3 years. The area where I would most see a change and shift, and we've talked about it a lot at this board, is around hate crime, and the fact that now race hate crime has completely dwarfed our kind of traditional hate crime, which of course was sectarian. Even within that, I touched on this earlier on, in terms of the data, we just need to be careful, because obviously what happened in Ballymena has skewed the figures most recently, but there's no doubt you can't get away from what the kind of medium-term trend around that is, which is being there's a significant increase in race hate-motivated incidents. So that's probably the one area definitely of concern in terms of a spike. In the remainder, like I said, it's really just about trying to gain a better understanding and insights then to allow us to target the great deal of work that we're already doing to deliver the best possible outcome and experience for victims.
Thank you. And just before I move to...
Sorry, Chair, as Davey was just going to come in.
Okay,
Sorry about
sorry.
that.
Yeah, sorry, and Brendan, maybe just to go direct to sort of the trend issue and across all crime types, just conscious of time as well. But what we're seeing across that is violence against the person broadly down, criminal damage, theft, burglary broadly down, but worryingly again, sexual offences, including rape, up. And I know we've reported that through the committees in the past, but that is broadly the trend across all those crime types. Challenges, complexity, flows from that. The cyber and the online elements again create those challenges in terms of triage, downloading, etc., and hence the importance of our cyber transformation plan. And actually, we talk about the attrition rates in terms of outcomes, but also the attrition rate in terms of our people. So our people are dealing with these complex, really traumatic incidents. The workload is increasing across a pool of people that is decreasing. So that attrition rate against our people as well. And ultimately, I think we're going to have to allocate our investigations in a different manner that will probably slow up some of those processes that Anthony talked about, because we just don't have the people to deliver them at pace. So there may well be challenges around that. But ultimately, that 30% is a really good outcome level. The challenge will be maintaining that as we move forward, given the reductions in our people.
Thank you for that, David. I'm going to ask Nuala, you had a question on hate crime. Do you want to bring that up now?
Yes, first, Chair, if you don't mind, I think it's really important to note that this is a positive step, I think, for the police in outlining the work that has been done, particularly around hate crime and, from my priority, violence against women and girls. We get these statistics through Performance Committee, but it's really difficult when we can't speak about them publicly. So this is a really important step. But over 4,000 domestic crimes and over 7,000 domestic abuse incidents is really concerning. And the fact that, domestic abuse incidents, women are over 20% of all crime against the person. The PSNI is really scary, so it's important that we're doing this. So I just want to welcome that. But specific to hate crime in particular, I have 2 questions. And how are you calculating hate crime when there's more than one motivator, if it could be race and religion? Because we have seen instances where it is both. And secondly, where there is a toxic culture and debate in society now, particularly around issues to do with race and transgender, we are seeing an increase in those crimes and incidences here. And I wonder if you can speak a little about the 10% increase in transgender hate crime attrition rates, because that's really unfortunate for victims of a very vulnerable and small section of our society.
So I'll describe it as the crime recording point. So we do record we will record multiple motivations, but what we don't do is then aggregate. So we don't count it twice and aggregate it into an overall figure for hate crime. But if it is entirely possible to have a multifaceted hate crime or incident, and we will properly record that, but we're very careful not to make sure that that doesn't create a false impression about, you know, astronomically high levels of hate crime, because you're maybe counting something 4 and 5 times. So that is a specific element that we'll have to be conscious of in terms of crime recording. You're right to highlight the issue there in terms of the attrition rate for the transgender identity, and even sexual orientation is higher than you would expect to see for overall crime. In fact, for transgender, it's nearly twice the level that you would typically see in terms of attrition for general crime. Specifically on transgender identity, it is a very small number of incidents. So I was just looking back into 2023 and 2024, and it was I think 39 crimes in 2023, 23, and in 24 it was 41. So small number of incidents, but like any crime, one crime is one too many, and that attrition rate is definitely a concern. So that's why, you know, we continue to do proactive outreach and engagement with the community. We're also working very closely, obviously, then through the hate crime advocacy scheme as well, just to try and understand what factors might be impacting upon that. And we've also done a bit just internally in terms of making sure that our own officers have a higher and greater degree of awareness when it comes to dealing with victims as well. So it is something which the hate crime lead is aware of and is focused on, and that we're going to continue to try and address. And again, when you look across the priority areas that we're talking about today, they're all characterised by having higher levels of attrition than you would see for standard crime as well, which again just reinforces the need for them to be priorities.
First point, thanks for that. And the small numbers, yes, it is small numbers, and so also the community too. So it's interesting to see how that is reflected. But on the first point, so how do you prioritise? What makes you decide it's race rather than how do you record it in terms of race or religious?
So it'll be defined by the victim and their perception of it. And in term for us, it's not that one enjoys any greater priority than another.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions on the issue of attrition, and that's from Les and Frank. If you have already got an answer with what we've heard, then we can move on. If not, feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. I welcome the new reporting approach, and I recognise the nuances around my question, but nonetheless, the proportion of cases which do not proceed to court because the victim does not support a prosecution does show a mixed picture, with a worrying increase for violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, and a welcome reduction in hate crime, except for transgender hate crime, which has been mentioned. Given the figures for violence against women and girls and domestic abuse are over 40%, what are and what can PSNI do to ensure that perpetrators are held to account across all crimes?
I'm going to ask Davey to deal with this because he's been focused on it, Les, and I'm conscious of time if I make comments as well because of where we are at the moment in the meeting. Davey?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, and I think what you'll see is fluctuations over periods of time. So, you know, when you look at violence against women and girls, the attrition rate probably peaked at 41% in 23-24. It then fell back to about 37% in 24-25. Currently, it sits about 30.5%. So that will fluctuate, but I'm conscious it's really early in the reporting cycle. So I wouldn't want to necessarily bolt that figure on too much. So it will change and alter. And again, domestic abuse attrition rates have been similar, peaked probably at 45% in 23-24, fell back to currently around 31%. So I think we're going in the right direction, would be the indication I would give at this stage, subject to that ongoing reporting over the period. And, you know, there's been significant work to understand, particularly in the VOG and the domestic violence space, the reasoning behind attrition rates. And many of these crimes will be extremely complex, as already said, but particularly at a personal level. And I think as a service, therefore, we have to focus on that responsive victim focused and ensuring that the needs of the victim are absolutely central to that we support the victim, we signpost the victim, we work with all our partners around that. So a lot of our work and our advances in that regard have been in terms of the use of body-worn video, for example, that secures that early evidence. The advocacy schemes that come in behind to support those victims through the process, to support the signposting, but also the work with our partners around Women's Aid, White Ribbon, etc., Men's Advisory Project. All that helps in terms of the journey and the supporting the victim. So really new and novel approaches around actually where we record statements, the use of Women's Aid premises, etc., to do that, as opposed to people having to come to the police station. So we're open to all those areas and really critically examine ourselves, and have done over the last number of years around that. But ultimately, this has to be driven by the needs of the victim. And there will be cases where victims for really complex issues decide not to proceed. And I think we have seen, certainly in England and Wales, some of the high-profile cases where perhaps cases were progressed against the wishes of victims that had really unwelcome outcomes in that regard too. So it's just getting the balance right, Les. But I think the more we work with our partners, the more we challenge ourselves, the more we advance our evidence capturing techniques, and also the work that Anthony talked about in terms of that joined up approach, that speeding up justice as well, and actually the extension of some of the penalty notice outcomes for some of the more minor offending helps speed that whole process and actually alleviate some of those concerns for victims as well. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an answer around those issues.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Frank?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the very comprehensive and detailed report, and we look forward, and I think it'll be fantastic. If I could just concentrate on tackling child criminal exploitation, it's point 1.3 on page 11. Now, I'm not interested in the detailed numbers. I'm not interested in the subset numbers at this time, because I realise you're just very early on the journey. But you talk about the reluctance of victims. 2/5 of aren't interested or do not proceed to court of all the crimes against under 18s. Is there any early drivers, any reasons you've seen because of this here? Because that's quite a lot. And secondly, at this early stage, can you share with us any plans you have to drive that way down?
I think that would be very similar to the answer I just gave. I think it's a combination of all those issues. There is a challenge around that progress in cases, particularly where children are the victims, and you can see that in the statistics, Frank, that you've outlined. So there's a body of work to be done on that. Child criminal exploitation is a relatively new issue for us, but it's something that has been experienced. It's a term that we have applied to better explain something that we have known has gone on for some considerable time. And there's a broad range of activity that will fall within that, from that paramilitary influence in communities right through to child grooming and people being groomed in their own bedrooms, etc. So it's such a breadth in terms of the risks around that. This is us on a journey now to, one, identify, agree what it is, and work forward in terms of our strategy in respect to that. But all those issues that I outlined, delays, I think will help and support the driving down of that attrition rate. But also there's a piece there around neighbourhood policing. There is that visibility in communities. There is that relationship with communities, that there are trusted officers in communities linked to schools, etc., that we grow the confidence of people to come forward, report, have conversations, but follow through with statements, court processes, etc. when required. So there's a lot of work to be done in that field.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to quickly add on that.
Sure.
So much of this is about education. I know previously people have felt that there were county lines issues in Northern Ireland. So there was some commentary a couple of years ago from Northern Ireland about effectively there not being the same challenges around child exploitation. And David mentioned paramilitaries. So much is going on that we can't address, our partners can't address, unless public services are properly funded, but especially us. If we're not in those communities, and we are not in those communities, we're 400 local neighbourhood officers short, that's an early warning system. That's officers going in schools. And without those officers, when I say we can't keep people safe with our numbers, and I will keep banging this drum, it's absolutely true. And the reality is, those are the sort of officers that change people's lives by literally saving them, because they are busybody, intrusive local officers knowing what's going on in those estates. And we haven't got those officers in there at the moment, and we need to get this funding, which I'll deal with in part 2.
Thanks, Chief. Final question from Peter Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. And like everybody else, welcome the reporting mechanisms and focus on victims, and be interested to see how things like the victims portal work as the weeks and months go past. I want to ask a question on the other side of the coin, from the consequence of the crimes to causes of crimes and perpetrator behaviour. And if I've got the statistics right, whether it's violence against women and girls or violence against men and boys, the perpetrators tend to be men, and there are a lot of repeat perpetrators as well. So can you comment on that in the context, especially, Chief? I think you have just commissioned a review of violence against women and girls by I forgot the name of the
Rachel Langdale,
yeah.
yeah.
Will that look at perpetrator behaviour and bringing people to justice, as well as obviously the quite correct focus on victims? And ACC Beck mentioned, I think, the launch later this month of perpetrator behaviour. Can you say a little bit more about that too?
So I'll begin, and I will open it up. I will say again, I'm conscious of time. I think the chair is too. There is a real importance around investment in perpetrator schemes, because the example I'll give is we had somebody who operated on an industrial scale, grooming children and getting children to commit violent acts against themselves. We arrested him a number of times. He was bailed through the court system, and that was understandable because of the circumstances at that time that were known. But his offending only stopped when he was in a prison. He couldn't offend. But he will come out. And when he comes out, he will continue his offending unless there is something done to change his behaviours. So perpetrator schemes are critically important. And I've seen the success of them previously in England, where they have literally made sure that women and girls would not be victims of offences in the future by dealing with the problem, which is the individual and their behaviours. So perpetrator schemes are incredibly important, and that includes obviously making sure that we have investments through the prison system that they can actually address the conduct that has put people in prison, and that there are mechanisms to monitor and ensure that people do not reoffend when they come out. And again, going to resources, our ability to look at violent and sexual offenders on the ratios of our officers compared with officers in England and Wales are dangerous, because we don't have the officers. So there are so many elements to this that come down to making sure that the right choices are made around the investments in our public services, and the police service should not be forgotten. The violence against women and girls issue, what I've just said really does capture much of that. But Rachel Langdale, the KC, who is going to report in October, so in this month, and of course the report will be shared with the board, Rachel is talking to victims, our partners, different agencies. She's going very broadly and widely across the sector that deal with issues of domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, and how we deal with misogyny. And I characterise the commissioning as this: how are we currently dealing with this? What more can we do to ensure our response is much improved? And that's both with regards to issues within the organisation, and we may talk about a television programme last night, a panorama programme about the Metropolitan Police Service. So she's met a number of female officers and staff around behaviours, but also, of course, how we're dealing with offences that are reported to us around domestic abuse, misogyny, hate type offences, and violence against women and girls. So I think we will get something of a school report that you understand, I think, all the trajectory we're on. Some of it will be painful, but there's no gain without some pain. This is about making sure this organisation moves forward and improves. And I think that report may deal with your question. Okay. David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add, Peter, thanks. I suppose just to be clear, when we talk about repeat offenders, and it's absolutely, you're absolutely correct that that's where our focus needs to be, and more so that will be the case and is the case. But repeat offenders are defined as offenders who have been linked by what we call an offender detection report to 2 or more crimes. So they may not necessarily be convicted. This is an identification tool to aid us in terms of looking at the right people and ensuring that our focus is in respect of the perpetrators in line with our commitments under the FOG action plan. And to give you an idea of that, at the minute there are in the region of just over 500 repeat offenders in terms of domestic abuse across Northern Ireland. Over 400 of those would fall in the twice category. Just over 100 would fall in the 3 to 5 times in terms of repeat offences, and 4 would fall in the 6 to 9 times, and nothing above that. So that allows us to target our problem solving, our interventions in respect of those people we believe are creating most harm and most risk in terms of the community. And I think that's a useful tool, but it is only a tool. I think for me, and certainly I would advocate around the linkage moving forward with that, and I think a problem-solving justice approach. So what does that mean? I think there's room for expansion around things like domestic abuse courts and drugs misuse courts that specifically link, if you like, the offending, the behaviour subsequent to offending and the outcomes to try and get that movement around those offenders. And that's part of the jigsaw that Anthony and the team will take forward in respect of the Criminal Justice Board. In respect of the perpetrator behaviour that I mentioned in October, so this is Project or Operation Vigilant. This is a bit of work we've been developing over the last 12 to 18 months. We now have teams properly trained and accredited in terms of this work, and it's a combination of uniform officers and plainclothes officers deployed to try and identify potential perpetrator behaviour and intervene before that manifests itself in offending. So again, to try and get ahead of the offending. There are clearly risks with that, so that's why it has to be carefully controlled, measured, developed, and rolled out in a really organised manner with that prior training. And certainly Melanie's folk in Operations Support Department, TSGs, have been trialling that, working through those processes. And it's been a very useful tactic thus far, and we have trialled it with some of the music events over the summer period. So formal launch will be around Halloween this month in Derry City, and we would hope to roll that out further. And I think that emphasises our focus moving forward is around the perpetrators and directing our action and our interventions against those folk. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And I know I said that was the last one, but there are a couple of questions which were in part 2, which they're relevant to what we're talking about now. Linda, you have a question on Marek and Rachel Langdale review?
Yeah, just can you confirm when we'll get the report on the Rachel Langdale review? Also, I know the Amelia Cresswell review is not yours, DOJ, but it was launched in February and we were told it would be 6 months. Have you been given any information as to when we'll be getting the outcome of that review, because that 6 months has now passed, so just to get some information around that? And then just in relation to the Marek review, because one of the points in the terms of reference for the Amelia Cresswell review was, were there opportunities to refer to Marek? I'm not sure there would have been any value in referring it to Marek at the time, because the process was so flawed and the engagement in it was so poor. So can you let us know? I don't need all the detail today because I understand we're time constrained, but we would need a report, I think, even if it's a written report at this stage, on an update from PSNI on where they think the Marek review is at, what improvements they think have been made, and therefore how the effectiveness of the Marek process has been improved in terms of PSNI's view. And that's obviously, I'm looking to know that in relation to both my briefs and policing and health, because I think Marek up to now has not been the process that it should be.
So firstly, with Rachel Langdale, she's reassured me that I'll get her report in October. I've not yet got it, and we'll share it with the board. So it should be before the next board. I would assume that you will get that report. Okay, when we've got it, you will get it. With regards to Amelia Cresswell, I know we were talking about this last week with David. I'll just let David give you the update on that so it's accurate.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I suppose the MARC review, first of all, and I would agree with your assessment, and certainly the review indicated a number of areas of weakness and improvement. Those recommendations have been progressed to the point where there's now a sort of an implementation plan. We have seconded a superintendent to the DOJ as part of that final push in terms of the implementation. So that should start to see those outworkings sort of developed into actual delivery now. In respect of the Creswell review, again, final stages of the report. And my understanding is that the report is complete. We've contributed to that significantly in terms of our submissions and our thoughts around recommendations, etc. And my understanding is that's very much at the final stages.
Thank you. And finally on this part one, Nuala, you have a question on out of court disposals?
I do, yes, but quickly, a supplementary to that, very quickly, covering both, was that in the Langdale review, one thing that you did talk about, following on, I think it was from Les' question about repeat offenders. One of the issues that we consistently come up against, where it's not the police's fault, it's not the PPS fault, is bail, where the police oppose, PPS oppose, and then a judge grants bail. And I think there are serious issues with that. And we talk about Creswell as one of the main ones who went on then to evade justice, and then others who have been granted bail and have gone on to murder. It is a very serious issue, and I wonder if that review will touch on that. And I know sometimes it is difficult for people to want to understand the reasoning behind judges deciding these, but it is a serious issue. So I know we're looking at it from the board's perspective, and I wonder, will that review touch on that at all?
Yeah, I honestly don't know the answer to that. It's not specifically in terms of reference, but like the McCulloch report, where the author feels that they should comment about something, they often will. I think traditionally, and you'll appreciate this, Nuala, the circumstances presented to a court are obviously for the court and the judge, so it's quite difficult for us to comment on cases because they're dealt with individually on a case-by-case basis by the judge involved. But it may well be, and I've given Rachel free range to comment on anything that she thinks she needs to comment on, so it may well be, but I can't specifically say.
And the other question was just to Anthony, you mentioned the out-of-court disposals, and thank you for the comments around that, but I just want to understand the role that the PSNI actually played in shaping the proposals that are now contained. As you said, they were around for 10 years, but if you can elaborate on the role that the police service played in shaping the options.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the Criminal Justice Board is the overarching piece where out-of-court disposal is governed. The out-of-court disposal working group, as I also mentioned, that is the one out of the 5 work streams within the Speeding Up Justice programme that is chaired by the PSNI. There's representation from the Department of Justice, the PPS, the Youth Justice Agency, and indeed more recently Belfast Harbour Police on that group. So it is the agencies across the justice spectre. PSNI were heavily involved with partners in scoping out what those potential additional offences could be included in the penalty notice for disorder. And indeed that's then what has gone out in the consultation document, which closed last week, was live for a period of time. The offences were identified, and those, as I said earlier, that was with a view of using penalty notice disorder for lower level offending. Some of which, as I mentioned, such as assaults on police, we already have community resolution notices for, but you go from there to the court system. And this is really about putting another option in there, whether it's the really low to the sort of the low, and then the stuff that needs to go to court. So it really just was about increasing the options available to police to have having their toolkit as to what they could take for disposals. Not only does it increase the opportunities for police, it is victim focused, because again, the victim will have the victim's views will be taken into consideration in relation to it. And it will also then allow us to speed up justice by not putting things to the court that don't need to go there, and then ensure that we have the most serious offending within the court system, and those can be dealt with quicker, again, for the benefit of the victims of those offences.
Thank you. I'm going to move now to part two. I have a few opening remarks and then I'll hand over to you, Chief Constable. Thank you for that very comprehensive report, which covered a lot of developments, and there's clearly a lot of transformative work underway and a lot more to do to improve the service provided to victims, including the introduction of the new victims portal. I have heard positive feedback, as well as sadly having personal experience of having to use the new virtual officer service, and it was very, very positive from my point of view. And I'll just say, virtual officer sounds like it's an AI generated police officer on the other end of a phone. It's actually a real officer who you speak to on video, like you would to your friends when you're doing a FaceTime call or whatever it happens to be. It was very positive. So thanks to all the officers and staff who have been progressing this very good work. And can I also place on record our appreciation to those officers who were honoured at the Chief Constable's highly commended awards last week. It was truly humbling experience to see officers who have done extraordinary work and have gone well beyond the call of duty, and all being recognised. We also met some exceptional four-legged staff along with their handlers during a dog visit to the dog training unit last month. We saw the great work being carried out, and these dogs are finding missing persons, criminals, drugs, weapons, supporting public disorder, and much, much more. And of course, at the weekend, we paid tribute to all of the officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice over the years at the National Police Memorial Day service, and we should never, ever forget. I'm going to move on to funding, Chief Constable, and you did mention funding. We continue to lobby on your behalf, both in terms of current provision and also the funding required to support legacy work. As you know, refining and funding arrangements for supporting the police work on legacy has been the subject of some discussion at the board. Whilst recognising that police funding is a devolved matter, as a board we were disappointed by the almost dismissive response of the Secretary of State to a request for a roundtable meeting with others to discuss how funding of legacy matters could be better managed. We have now written again. And as we have also written to the Department of Finance regarding Treasury intervention on funding for the data breach claims. You mentioned in your report, Chief Constable, further uncertainty due to October monitoring slipping into November. Our position is very clear. Public safety is too important to rely on leftover in budgets. I'm going to move to the McCulloch review, which you referenced briefly earlier on. The publication of the review has drawn widespread commentary. And as a board, we met last week and again we met yesterday to consider and discuss next steps. And there are a range of questions on the contents of the report, which we will come to later on. At the outset, can I say that the board fully recognises the significance of the journey the PSNI have been under over the last 15 months from when Mr. McCulloch Casey was appointed. It is, as I said, an unprecedented step to open up policing in this way, and it is to your credit. There is no doubt that the McCulloch report represents a seminal moment for openness and transparency in policing, and it is this transparency that many feel should now extend to other law enforcement and intelligence agencies who use such powers. The board does not disagree, but these are outside our remit. As a board, we are agreed that our focus must be on ensuring the full implementation of the recommendations and remedial issues outlined in the review within PSNI. Chief Constable, you have agreed to provide the board with a full implementation plan, and we would ask you to provide quarterly update reports against that plan. The McCulloch review is comprehensive and meets the terms of reference that have been set to date. As noted in Recommendation 1, there are matters still to be considered through ongoing IPT proceedings that will be subject to a supplementary review and report, as well as reviewing PSNI actions and recommendations made. The board agrees that the supplementary report will be considered as part of the board's Section 59 request. Until the board receives this report, a decision will be referred on whether there is any material benefit or requirement to pursue a Section 60 inquiry under the Police Northern Ireland Act. In progressing oversight of the McCulloch report's findings, the board will seek to engage with all relevant stakeholders, the group of external stakeholders who assisted the review, the Information Commissioner's Office and the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office to better understand their perspectives on the report. We also wish to explore issues around the efficacy of the current inspection and oversight arrangements in place for this very difficult area of work. The board's Human Rights Advisor will also be tasked on the ongoing McCulloch work so that assurance can continue to be provided to the board as and when necessary. And we will, as I understand, will you be seeking advice and further assessing whether the report gives rise to any misconduct matters. There is no doubt this report has exposed a serious breach of trust, and policing has a job of work to do to restore further confidence. I have no doubt in your commitment, Chief Constable, to effect and embed the changes that are now required. Before I move to questions, do you wish to make any opening remarks?
I do, Chair, thank you. I would like to start in familiar territory, if I may, about the organisation's financial picture because of the monitoring round that's about to occur. We will continue to bid into the October monitoring return for the 23.1 million, that's 23.1 million, which is our projected shortfall against our budget for this financial year. That includes 7 million to support the recovery business case to recover officer numbers to 7,000 police officers and 2,572 police staff. I was pleased to read of the Finance Minister's remarks this week that health workers in Northern Ireland will get their pay rise. Looking at the fairness of such awards, I'm sure he will be equally determined to support police pay awards, and I'll be writing to the Justice Minister and the Finance Minister in that regard. It's important that I accept and acknowledge, which I do, that ministers have a wickedly difficult job in addressing gaps in public service budgets. There are a number of reasons for this, but I don't need to go through those now with you because you know them well. As I understand the current position, health has a £614 million projected overspend, and education has one in the region of £300 million. It's worth recalling that the Northern Ireland Executive has increased the health budget from circa 3.3 billion in 2010 to around about, I think it's 8 billion today, leading to a significant increase in workforce, whilst the PSNI budget has remained almost at the same level since 2010, and our numbers have been butchered. Both education and health have received considerable uplifts in their budgets, whilst policing, that holds the fabric of our society together, has not been financially supported in anywhere near the same way. We are planning to address our dangerously low numbers through the recovery business case, but at least can we please, and those few officers and staff that we do have, get their recommended pay awards in the same way as health. Our workforce are constantly picking up the pieces of society breaking down, looking after those people that we are leaving behind. Policing is now the front line of mental health services in Northern Ireland, something we are neither resourced for or trained for. And Chief Constable colleagues of mine in England and Wales do not need to make specific pleas for the pay awards for their officers. This is just not acceptable. Notwithstanding our ongoing recruitment efforts, at the start of last month, our headcount stood at a new record low of 6,233. Letters and lobbying are just not cutting it. This is simply not good enough. It's not fair, and it leaves the police service of Northern Ireland to do a job that they simply cannot do as they would like to because they do not have the numbers. Let me again be clear, we cannot keep people safe with these numbers. We were unsuccessful again, this time in the June monitoring round, in getting support for our recovery business case or our wider funding gap, in spite of strong lobbying. In the coming weeks, it's absolutely crucial that Northern Ireland's politicians recognise policing as a priority public service in the way it does for other public services. A further failure by the executive to do so will result to us in failing to protect people and deliver on our policing plan. We cannot do this job unless you give us the tools to do it. The October monitoring round, as we've heard from the Chair, will now slip to later in the year, continuing the uncertainty and frustration of our planning. It also limits the time available for us to respond to budgetary decisions. This cycle of annual budget allocation and the reliance on in-year funding are symptoms of underlying structural problems with how policing is funded in Northern Ireland. In the past month, there was a court hearing on 2023's data breach, which shone a light on our financial strain. When I came into office, resolving this issue was just one of a number of priorities, not just for legal compliance, but also for the workforce. We're working closely with the Department of Justice and Finance to find a way forward that is fair and affordable. But all fiscal rules dictate that should be settled as soon as possible. It will make it far more affordable in the long term. I was delighted to note that in Westminster, the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee has announced a new inquiry into policing and security in Northern Ireland. As we approach the 25th anniversary of the PSNI, I believe this is a welcome chance to take stock, scrutinise how far policing has come and where it needs to go. It's also a crucial opportunity to challenge aspects of how policing is funded. I recommend the board look at the terms of reference. I also welcome the announcement of the joint framework on legacy, particularly if this results in a system people can finally trust, which provides victims with the information they've been craving for years. However, for a revised legacy commission to work, the planning must include additional funding for policing. Currently, legacy investigations cost our organisation £24 million a year. It's not right that the cost of dealing with legacy comes out of our core budget, which is meant to be spent on policing Northern Ireland today. That money should be paying for our neighbourhood and response officers. As you mentioned, Chair, on September the 24th, I welcome the publication of the McCulloch Review. I commissioned this to provide an independent assessment of our use of covert surveillance powers against journalists, lawyers and other non-governmental organisations between 2011 and 2024. I want to thank Angus McCulloch KC for the thoroughness and clarity which his work was approached with. The headline story of the review was not in the media at all last week. The key story of the McCulloch Review was that it occurred at all, and did so with the full cooperation and support of those in this organisation, with direct, unsupervised and unprecedented access provided to all covert databases to Mr McCulloch and his team. This is something he strongly commented on before the report was published last week. I very much welcome the principle and main conclusion of Mr McCulloch that there's no basis for concerns that PSNI has been using covert measures in respect of journalists or lawyers in a widespread or systemic way. Perhaps I should repeat that again. I very much welcome the main and principal outcome of the report, that there's no evidence in respect of journalists or lawyers being monitored in a widespread or systemic way. According to Mr McCulloch, the entire story comes from a mistaken public position, and this is a mistaken position by other bodies, of the PSNI abusing covert measures against journalists and lawyers that's come from a, as he describes, compounding or snowballing effect that he says emanates from 5 particular issues. Firstly, an assumption that the lamentable failures in the Op-Urta investigation, and particularly the unlawful treatment of Mr Burney and Mr McCaffrey, as being the tip of an iceberg. In simple terms, Just because we got things so badly wrong with Mr. McCaffrey and Mr. Burney does not mean we've done this elsewhere, and the report says that. Secondly, the number of communications data applications relating to journalists and lawyers in our June 2024 PSNI report to this board, which gives a misleading impression of the scope and use of powers that's been, in Mr. McCulloch's words, misinterpreted and misreported. In simple terms, the 323 number of applications referenced in the report to the board from the PSNI were not made to identify journalist sources, as was interpreted by most people. Thirdly, Mr. McCulloch points out there was a misrepresentation of a redacted meeting note produced in the Burney and McCaffrey case, which has mistakenly taken to mean that a list of 8 journalists had been the subject of routine surveillance. Again, this was not the case. Fourthly, Mr. McCulloch comments that historical serious intrusion by state authorities, including before there was statutory regulation, has led to a number of these concerns. And finally, he identifies that because of the limitations in statutory remedies to provide positive answers to concerns in the realm of covert procedures and the general policy of neither confirming or denying the alleged use of such measures in any case, has again compounded the issues. The review, though, has, as I accept, shown examples where there have been deficiencies, failings of process and of record keeping. I would have been stunned if it had not. We've immediately taken steps to correct these and to put in place safeguards that will prevent them from happening again. As you know, I fully accept the Review 16 recommendations. This review reflects the PSNI's ongoing commitment to transparency and openness. The recommendations will all be advanced through a timely programme of work to ensure we are constantly seeking to achieve the highest of standards in the application and authorisation process for covert measures. ACC BEC will lead an implementation team and will ensure the recommendations are addressed and will report into the PSNI data board chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable. Any large organisation undergoing this level of legal scrutiny provided by Mr. McCulloch and his team, looking over a 14-year period of covert activity, should expect such issues to come to light. Although not part of his terms of reference, from my reading of the report, there is no finding that officers acted in bad faith or any referencing of any misconduct or any criminality. And I would hope that Mr. McCulloch would have commented if there was such. I've been reassured by what Mr. McCulloch describes as the proper emphasis on the far more numerous examples of careful and considered practices processed by diligent professionals in full accordance with the legal framework and all of its safeguards. I'm a huge advocate for openness and transparency, even in the arena of covert measures, and especially where legitimate public concerns are expressed. This comprehensive report sets out that no evidence exists of the abuse of those powers by the PSNI, but that our processes in the application process needs to improve, and that will happen. I very much look forward to updating the board on our progress in responding to his recommendations. Mr. McCulloch will return to assess that progress and report on any findings that are relevant to what he's already reported upon from any ongoing and unfinished IPT proceedings. This entire process is a hugely positive step in transparency and learning for UK policing, and to ensure that this organisation is an exemplar in authorising covert authorities. I do just want to thank all of those on the group that supported this work, the group of experts and stakeholders. Without their help, the report would not have been as fulsome as it was. Finally, last month, I had the great honour of attending an annual lunch for the Police Widows Association, which should remind us all of the sacrifice and risks of being a police officer. And last Sunday, Chair, as you referenced, you and I both attended the National Police Memorial at Coventry Cathedral. Both occasions were moving reminders of the ultimate sacrifice made by so many colleagues who lost their lives in the line of duty, and a chance to stand together with their families. This is a deeply personal issue for me and the senior team, and will remain a priority of ours to ensure their service and sacrifice are not forgotten. And on the 17th of September, as you mentioned, Chair, we had the pleasure of hosting our highly commended awards ceremony at the Great Hall at Stormont. I was delighted that the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Policing Board and the Chief Exec were in attendance, and also want to thank Trevor for effectively hosting the event for the PSNI. This annual event is one of the most important in our calendar. It provides an opportunity to recognise officers and staff who've gone above and beyond in their service to the public. This year, 35 colleagues were acknowledged for acts of exceptional courage, dedication and professionalism, both on and off duty. Listening to their stories, told by their colleagues, it was humbling and inspiring, and a powerful reminder of the remarkable people who make up this organisation. Their actions embody the very best of policing. I want to place on record my gratitude not only to those who received awards, but to all their families and colleagues who support them and allow them to do the job that they love. And I'm very happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I'm going to just move straight into questions. I'm going to start with Trevor because he wants to comment on that event, and then you have a question relating to financial pressures as well.
Oh, okay, thank you. And in terms of the event, it was a co-signed event. I may have been the main sponsor, but I want to put in record all of the political parties all equally supported that event. So just for the public record, to make sure that that's clear, all parties did. The executive parties supported that event. The only thing I would say I was disappointed with the event was that the public couldn't see the heroism of some of those officers. It's just unfortunate that some of that has to be done in a format that they can't see what those officers done. And I have to say, I mean, it's actually making me fill with tears again, hearing some of the efforts that those officers went to. So I can't overstate about how emotional it was for those of us who attended to hear what some of those people went through. And indeed, even when they were off duty, which struck most of us, how that affected them. So in terms of that, great event. Look forward to seeing the police continuing that, because I think it was actually very welcome from the officers as well, that there's general recognition of what they've done. Just on my main question then, Chief Constable, you talked about funding and you talked about legacy. And I hear the figures there of the 24 million, which is startling in terms of what that's cost. But there is other pressures in Northern Ireland, and we have an immigration problem in Northern Ireland, and the police are picking up a lot of the problems in connection with that. So I'm asking in relation to that, and I see that you have to, on a weekly basis, there's protests in various parts of the constituency, and indeed my own within South Antrim, where the police are in attendance to actually make sure that those are lawful. And I'm not denying anyone's right to protest. However, those have been brought about because of how the Home Office have treated asylum seekers and how they've placed them in hotels in Northern Ireland and the issues that go with that. So is there any specific funding or conversations with yourself, the Secretary of State and the Home Office to actually get additional funding to fund those, given it was actually the Home Office that brought the asylum seekers to Northern Ireland?
So I've not had those conversations, Trevor. I've focused my efforts towards London. Almost I'm trying to get some sort of ring fence funding for this organisation before we wither and disappear. But also because the legacy case has occurred during direct rule, and they're funding this, what will now be called the Legacy Commission, what was obviously the ICRIR, that it makes no sense that they won't fund us for doing legacy. It actually is contradictory to what they're doing. We don't, I'm going to look towards Pamela, we don't get any additional money for any of those issues that you are seeing, which are clearly not going to decrease. What we're seeing currently in society, and there was an incredibly large demonstration in London a few Saturdays ago of unprecedented numbers of people coming out to protest. This is an issue that will continue, and with our extremely thin green line, it means even those officers that we do have in our neighbourhoods, they are distracted from doing their work there because they're abstracted to deal with these issues so often. Even though we've got on paper numbers in our local policing teams, they're not doing the local policing job. But the short answer is we don't get any funding. I'm happy to write more letters and push for that, but I very much doubt we would receive a very sympathetic hearing. But I'll just look at Pamela. Mel's done a lot actually in this space recently around protest. I don't know if they've got any comments to make.
Yeah, I think just to add that it would probably come into the same space as things like policing of football matches. And where's the line between the person who's bringing the people into the space versus the wider public space? And there is some really well-tested case law around the appropriateness of charging for police services around football. And there would be kind of a transfer across to, if you're policing the public space, that there's people in because they're coming to an event of any description, protest event, it would sort of cross into that kind of space. However, we would always look to put forward cases where we can to say that the people are only there because of the event. So we do try and apply quite rigorously where we can, but it would definitely cross into that space, which was a famous case from Leeds United, actually.
I just want to come back on that. I mean, I suppose sporting, football, also forms of sport, has been recognised. It's been here for many years. The asylum problem has been put upon us by the actions of the government and the Home Office, who have placed them here. So I would see those things as entirely different. At the same time, I think people should have the right for freedom of expression and concern. But this government here in Northern Ireland had no say in the placing of asylum seekers, so the pressure shouldn't be on the PSNI. So if the government place asylum seekers in Northern Ireland, it's the government, the Westminster government, that is applying the pressure on the PSNI to actually police that. So I would ask, through yourself, Chief Constable, we need to be imaginative in this in terms of how we can find additional funding for
it. Listen, it's a helpful question, and I'll take it away, Troy. Can I mention one thing, just because it'd be remiss of me? We have asked our comms team those stories of heroism that you heard at Stormont. We are seeking to put those in the public domain. This is a unique policing environment because of the threat to officers, but where we can, we are seeking to tell the true blue light story, because those stories are incredible, even more incredible than the programme itself. So we are looking to do that.
Thank you. We've got some questions on the McCulloch review. I'm going to ask Jerry to start those. You have two questions, I think, Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. And I think we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to go straight into it, Chief Constable. I mean, everybody in this room, I presume, including myself, welcomed the McCulloch report. You said, and you repeated again there, you said publicly at its launch that you didn't think there was any misconduct issues had to be followed up, and you also said that there was no issue of things being done criminally or unlawful. I suppose the question is, and I could give you a couple of examples, you've given some examples here, but just 2 of them. Is that still your position? And it seems to be, because you said it there. But there were unlawful retentions of the 2 journalist data, despite clear court orders, which I think is a pretty serious matter. I don't know if it's negligence or gross negligence or whatever. Also in the defensive operations, McCulloch said that the operation was likely unlawful. I understand that he put likely in there, it was likely unlawful. But you also said there was no issue there as well. I have to be honest with you, I just find it incredible. I could just very quickly, because you yourselves, there's 21 unlawful uses of covert powers to attempt to identify journalist sources. And that was double the figure we were told in June 2024. There was 8 journalists subject to unlawful use of powers to seek the identity of their sources. This is out of the report, by the way. There was a washing through process, which was quite a substantial issue. A likely breach of Articles 8 and 10 of the Human Rights Act. There's direct surveillance on 4 occasions against journalists, despite the report in June 2024, which there was none occurred. And even the direct surveillance of journalist Donald McIntyre on social media is possibly unlawful as well. And as I said earlier, there was, I think I said earlier, the deletion of the journalist's history, sorry, the issues that they just had in storage was a breach of court undertakings. So, I mean, I don't think I'm on my own. I just think for you to come in and to say that there's no issue here, I just find hard, really.
Okay.
So is it still your view that there's nothing there either to be pursued unlawful? I know some of this was a time past, but there had to be authorizations given.
Yeah.
They had to be at a fairly, I presume, some of them anyway, at a fairly substantial level. And yet you're saying there's no issue of misconduct.
May I? Right.
Yes.
I've read the McCulloch review forensically, and some of these questions, I think it's important that Angus would speak to you about them. So he set out very clearly in his introduction about the changing landscape of the legislation and the codes, the guidance that support the legislation around the obtaining of covert data. There is a finding by an IPT hearing against the PSNI in 2013 with regards to Mr. McCaffrey. The finding didn't result in any sanction, and the commentary of the judgment was that the officers acted in good faith, because the devil's in the detail. The 2007 codes that dictated that, and this is an area that I know well, were not fit for purpose. They were changed in 2015. So the 2015 renewal of the codes led to a public interest test being introduced, which was a sensible evolution of these covert measures. So where you make comment about journalist data being sought, proper consideration wasn't given in the application process around things that weren't required by the code, but should have been. So in my view, looking at the 2013 IPT case of Mr. McCaffrey, where the commentary was that the officers acted in good faith, that's the same, that's applicable to those other cases. Let's deal with defensive operations. Again, Mr. McCulloch makes clear, and it's in the report, that there's a statutory framework. I have a personal view on this, and then there's a legal position. There's a statutory framework that provides for organisations, including the PSNI, to monitor their communication systems where people may be improperly releasing information to people that they shouldn't. We have, as Mr. McCulloch suggested we might want to, inform the Information Commissioner about those defensive operations. That, I think you know again in the report, the last time this was done was March of 2023. Formally, there was a notification from this office in May 2024, they're not to be done again. And that will now be subject to clear policy and guidance that will be part of the recommendations being delivered upon by us. But that has been referred to the Information Commissioner. It will be for the Information Commissioner on the material that's in the report and any questions they wish to ask us to determine about the legality of that. Mr. McCulloch can't and I can't. But is there a legal framework for it? Yes. And Mr. McCulloch says in his report as well, he expects that type of activity in the future to be subject to, I think the wording is, judicial determination. So in effect, he thinks that in the future, there will be a legal case that will say something, a bit like the codes changing from 2007 to when they changed in 2015, with regards to the considerations to apply for comms data around special status people. He thinks there'll be a consideration, a judicial consideration, about, if you like, that blanket approach to, I'll use the term washing through comms data. But that's not happened at the moment. What I would say is my personal view is that in all the time that I've been a senior investigating officer and dealt with some really complex organised crime and counter-terrorism operations, I don't think I've ever required comms data for a solicitor. I don't understand a solicitor or a journalist, forgive me. So I don't understand why the washing through was done. And it's not going to happen anymore. It's stopped. But any determination ultimately about whether that specifically was not lawful, the Information Commissioner will determine it. But on what I know and what I understand from the report, the indications are that, and it's not for me to say, that that's not likely to be the case. And we have referred all of the matters that Mr. McCulloch has identified, including you mentioned directed surveillances, this over a 14-year period. There were 3 that he identified. One was the Bernie McCaffrey case, which is known and has been dealt with through legal processes. One was Donald McIntyre, which was the accessing of his open Twitter feed through Google. Now, if that was a newspaper article that had been written, we wouldn't be having a discussion. If we'd cut out the article in a newspaper, this is the nuances of the legality. I don't think that creates any concern about needing a directed surveillance authority. So the devil's in the detail of all of this. And what I am going to do, and I've made the Chief Executive aware of this, I've commissioned very senior counsel, one of the most eminent counsel in the country that deals with misconduct of officers, to review the McCulloch report and come back, and I'll share that response with the board as to whether there is anything that we should be alive to with regards to any misconduct or criminality. But in all of the cases you mention, and the devil is in the detail, and from reading the report, which Mr. McCulloch has highlighted things beyond his terms of reference where he's had a concern. Had he had any concern as eminent counsel about what you're seeking to advance, any misconduct or criminality, I am very confident that he would have highlighted that to me, not only in the report, but upon finding it. But to cross the T's and dot the I's, we will get independent counsel who is a specialist in misconduct to review the entire report, and we will share that product with the policing board.
Chief Constable, I'll finish with this. I mean, you went through a number of details there, and you said about the, we have the case that was settled out of court. You read the devils in the detail. You see, was it wrong or was it right? And if it was wrong, because nobody's saying it wasn't wrong, then was there any thought of even, have you spoken to the people who did the washing through? It was 1,000 something cases or 1,000 phone calls,
So I don't know which case you're talking about that was wrong. I have made very clear that what happened to Mr. Burney and Mr. McCaffrey, I don't understand, is completely wrong. And I've apologised. And I've written to them.
But it was the PSNI who were involved. I'm not trying to be oversimple here, but it was the PSNI which was involved.
So that's been dealt with by judicial process, and we've completely admitted that.
And there's nothing that the police are involved in terms of that. I mean, it was done by judicial process, but why had it to go there?
Well, we went there because at the time, I suppose, people, and I can't speak for them because this is, 2018, I really can't, Jerry, but the report sets out the issues, and that has been dealt with both through the civil courts and through the IPT. And we have absolutely opened ourselves up to allowing Mr. McCulloch and his team to look at all of that case, as well as all the ongoing live cases. So let's see what counsel says about the entirety of the McCulloch report. What we aren't doing is ducking anything. We're not. And it's important to say this, all of the staff, listen, this isn't ordinary for police forces to open themselves up around people come in and examine what they do in the covert world. Normally, excuses of legal privilege or sensitivity of information mean that you don't allow people in. Not one barrier has been put in Mr. McCulloch's way. Direct, unsupervised, complete access to everything. So this is about putting things right. And the organisation and all those staff have worked tirelessly, and Mr. McCulloch says this, to achieve the shared aim of doing this as well as we possibly can. So we'll address your concern around the Bernie and McCaffrey, which is commented on fully in the report, around any police officer implications through independent senior counsel. So all that's being done. And I don't know what more I can offer you. But from the report, I do not see anything with regards to malice. Anybody who was deliberately trying to inappropriately use the system. There were mistakes. There were process issues. There was a lack of legal advice. Special status issues weren't properly thought through. But the codes and the legislation throughout this period have been constantly changing. And in his introduction last week, Mr. McCulloch says this is really difficult stuff. It's complicated. And that's why you have to look at each individual case. But we're not hiding behind anything. And hopefully, well, you will get access to what council say about the report. Okay.
Thank you. I want to ask Nuala to come in with, you want to come in on this subject, and you have another question about data?
Thank you. Just a supplementary to this. With regards to any possible misconduct and recognising, respecting no malice that our officers acted in good faith. In the McCulloch report, there are a number of investigations that resulted in the surveillance that McCulloch has said, was authorised but unlawful, and they emanate from the professional standards department. And yes, whilst they could be seen as acted in good faith because of that 2013 case, the IPT case, but does it mean it's ethical? Was there an approach within professional standards that actually investigating our own officers rather than dealing with the other issues, that this was an not in saying easier, but a road to go down instead, rather than changing a culture where people felt that they maybe should leak or speak out to journalists, and the IPT case is still ongoing, but we know that there are names and there are people who are evident in a number of these cases, and there may be others as well. And it's acted in good faith, but it doesn't mean it was ever ethical. But also, if there were any officers involved, or any of them still there anyway, have they not retired? But the second question, because I'll give you both.
Was that an actual question? What was the question there?
Was around any officers, are they retired? But also with regards to, was there an approach within PSD to look at those individual officers through surveillance rather than any other methods at their disposal? And then the second question was the defensive operations, washing of journalists' numbers, the actual lists and data of the journalist numbers, has that now been removed and deleted from all of the police records?
So I think, and forgive me if I misunderstand this, you're conflating a couple of issues. If I deal with the PSD issue, the lawful business monitoring as it's described, which again in the report, Mr. McCulloch, and I'm aware of this, there is a statutory framework for that to happen. Okay. There wasn't, as far as I know, any legal advice obtained for that. None can be found. Things evolve and move forward, and we become better at how we do things all the time. The McCulloch report not only will determine in the future that nothing like that could happen without any legal advice, but also because of my decision, and I've spoken directly to PSD, that will not happen again. So there's the lawful business monitoring, and then there's this washing through of numbers, and you mentioned about the lists as well. I think in the report it talks about 300. So with the washing through issue, I personally, and I mentioned this when I was asked the question by Jerry, believe there should be a specific and precise concern about the leaking of information or material leaving the organisation because we hold such sensitive information. You would expect us to police that. You would expect us to make sure that our staff behave properly. And we know, unfortunately, that on occasions our staff don't act properly. And there's one thing about reporting things in a noble and rightful way, but a lot of people act criminally and against our code of ethics by releasing information they shouldn't. That washing through issue, in my own personal view, is something that should not happen, and it will not happen anymore. And the lists that you ask about, the lists are now, I don't know if this is the right correct term, Nuala, but the lists are held. I have made the decision they're to be destroyed on the back of the fact they're never going to be used again for that purpose. Okay. You mentioned ongoing IPT proceedings. There is the prospect that in those proceedings, the tribunal may ask for access to that material. So they're held where nobody can access them, nobody can use them until the tribunals are finished and any legal obligations that we have to provide the tribunals with them have completed, and then they'll be deleted. That's the legal position that I've been advised. I can't delete them in case they're needed for those proceedings, but they're effectively completely cocooned. Nobody can access to them. They're not being used for anything. Does that assist?
Yeah, and I think I understand that, and I had queried that in my own head myself, that if they would be used. And with regards to my supplementary to Jerry's question and about the officers acting in good faith, what about the most recent cases post 2015? And I know there, I think, I can't remember the number, but it was very few. But what about any case of surveillance post 2015 and the issue of misconduct? Because the acting in good faith argument to me, following the change in legislation, might not stand then. And then the third, you mentioned the directed surveillance with 3, but you mentioned 2 cases. Can we get any more information on the third one that was said that the information obtained, that there was no source identification sought and the information was appropriately obtained and conducted, but that's all that was said on it, but not.
Yeah, so the third case, I'll do that because you've just mentioned it. No, you can't, unfortunately, because of the nature of what that is. But the human rights legal advisor you have can access that material to assure you of the reason that Mr. McCulloch, and I'm sure he's impressed this board as much as he's impressed us, has rightfully made that determination that he can say no more than he already has. You know, Mr. McCulloch identified, and I think people get conflated with the different elements. There's a lot in the report. Okay, there is. Now, this is my world, covert policing, so it's very difficult for people on the board, lay people, to look at all this and try and understand it all. It's complicated, and that's what he set out with a number of rationale and bullet points as to why it's complicated when he introduced the report last week. And he has had the benefit of over a year with his team of looking at each of those cases. But if I can contextualize it as this, the biggest concern is that when we have thought that there's any risk that in any way, anything we're doing, whether it's comms data, which is getting effectively billing, to directed surveillance or more intrusive surveillance activity, is there any risk that that surveillance may capture or come across people from a special status? That could be lawyers, that could be journalists, that could be people who, in effect, on any reasonable interpretation, you would consider would have some sort of protection. And legally, and this will be the same elsewhere, not just in the PSNI, we have not put our minds to that sufficiently. And I'll tell you how complicated this gets. In 2010, there's another set of codes in 2010 that designated that certain premises to protect lawyers, if you're going to do surveillance there, rather than be directed surveillance authorities, which is authorised at superintendent ranks, it would need to be authorised at chief officer rank. So these codes are changing all the time. So it's wickedly difficult to speak about this issue unless you look at a very individual case and break it down as to what the codes were at the time and what the officers did. And I think what Mr. McCulloch has done with great care and very carefully is look at those cases and say, look, your processes need to improve. And this is why, and he set this out, this is why, in the 5 criteria I mentioned in my opening remarks, everybody has got a view that we've run away with ourselves in covert surveillance, what we've been doing. And he sets out why that has happened, why that, and he talks about misunderstanding, misinterpretation. That's why that's happened. Now, he's going to come back, and I'm sure he saw all the remarks in the media and by various people, and it'll be interesting to see what he says when he comes back and looks at what we've done around the recommendations, which is on us to do in a very fulsome way. I am still concerned about recommendation 7, which I'm happy to answer questions on, but we are determined to deliver on that, but that's not straightforward. But he will then report to me, and I will provide that report to the board and publicly around where we are. And he does repeatedly say about the shared endeavour to literally be the best that we can at this and the cooperation. I personally think, and I'm not saying this because I'm defensive because I'm the Chief Constable, I personally think that this is unique for any police organisation in the United Kingdom to have done this. And rather than see that for what it is, which I think those in the group of experts and stakeholders saw it for that, there's been a slight miscalculation of what the report is actually saying. So listen, I know we've got to improve, but my comments in my opening remarks and my responses to Jerry, unless somebody tells me different, and this isn't my first rodeo at looking at stuff like this, we've got stuff to do, but our officers and staff have not been doing things in a malicious or unlawful way. They haven't. But caveat that, let's get independent counsel of the most senior level to look at it, and we'll share that with you.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you. Colin McGrath, and a question on intelligence agencies.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, and I look forward to working with you and your team in the period ahead in this new role for myself. And I thank you for your comments so far on the McCulloch report. I think that it is a good report. I think it is investigated and looked at areas where we should be looking at. It may have only found 1 or 2 instances of things not going the way they should have, but the fact that those 1 or 2 instances are there is nonetheless worrying. And I think that the response from yourself and your team has been positive in wanting to engage in that. But one of the things about the report that I feel is sometimes it's what it doesn't say, or it's about what it didn't get into, but it did somehow or another shine a light. And to use 2 or 3 little analogies to help me understand it, it's like it went past the cul-de-sac and looked in and said, there's stuff in there, but it's not my remit to go in there, but I'm just going to keep going. Or that he has shone a light and stuff and said, I don't know what's there. One of which would be the work of the intelligence agencies, how they interact with yourselves, and how some of that may have crossed over into the work of journalists and others. And I suppose that has to be undertaken in a way where there's a structure. And really what I was interested in asking is, in terms of the structure between yourselves and the intelligence agencies, is there a memorandum of understanding? Is there some connections that sort of provides a scaffolding around that work? And if so, obviously we can't ask the intelligence agencies what they're doing or how they're doing it, but we are supposed to be providing some form of oversight to the work of the police service. So is there a way for your half of the jigsaw to be discussed, or to be provide some sort of oversight for that?
So we're in territory here, and I'll probably bring Davey in. I think of the St Andrews Agreement and its Annex E sets out the relationship and the responsibilities between the intelligence agencies and the PSNI and intelligence collection in Northern Ireland. Annex E of the St Andrews Agreement. And the reviewer of terrorism here has a role, an oversight role in that process. I know there's been commentary recently about MI5. What I would say there is, firstly, the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is the statutory framework for people like Mr McCaffrey and Mr Burney to approach if they have concerns that they have been illegally monitored. The IPT, their jurisdiction covers the intelligence agencies, and there are ongoing IPT cases which are reported in the media at the moment, which have to complete their due process. So that will deal with, as a way of reassurance, as an independent body to look at any potential wrongdoing or concerns of people. The St Andrews Agreement gives a framework as to how the relationship is, and some accountability in there. All I can do is, all we can do at this table, is be responsible for the police service of Northern Ireland. I can't answer questions for, and I have no responsibility for our colleagues in the intelligence agencies. But there are frameworks that provide you with those reassurances. And of course, it's within the gift of the IPT to make public comment if they see fit around those ongoing IPT cases, if they think that is necessary to do. And I don't think there's much more I can say on that. But Davey, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and again, look forward to working with you on the board. I would just add that yes, that framework, that scaffolding is Annex E of the St Andrews Agreement, and we would see ourselves in policing as very much the protectors of Annex E, and any MOUs will flow from that in terms of joint working with other agencies, as you would expect we would have, be it with the NCA, be it with HMRC or other partner agencies in the wider policing space. But certainly I can confirm that Annex E is absolutely the foundation of our relationship with, and that outlines the requirements for sharing information, for disseminating information, and for accountability. Those are some of the pillars that's built on. And that very much forms the basis and allows us to engage with other organisations. But absolutely, accountability is key to that. I think there is a wash across because of Annex E in terms of McCulloch's recommendations, particularly around that scrutiny, that training, development, systems improvements, etc., that will wash across to all our partner agencies that will work in this space. So, ultimately we are the protectors of this. And if we're enhancing our ability to respond positively to McCulloch, I think that will have a residual impact across all those other agencies as well.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Question from Keith for Mel on road safety.
Good, thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, my question obviously relates to road safety. Sam Donaldson and others in your team obviously are doing a good job in education and delivering a powerful message, which we see at times does a good job, at other times not so much, but that's out of his control at times. However, lately I see some school children delivering a different message, that it's the road that kills, which is creating a contradiction between the police message, and it's a mixed message coming across, and not from the police, I might add, but some are getting children to deliver that message that roads are killing. So based on the actual causation factors, what message would you give the public today listening to this?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. And it is a good opportunity to reinforce the message. So I think it's important to differentiate between a causation factor of a road traffic collision and a contributory factor. And the vast majority of causation factors are by the road user. So whether it's by pedestrians, whether it's by drivers, other people who are using the roads, they are the causation factors. In relation to fatal collisions, we focused on the fatal 5. So the vast majority of causation factors for fatal collisions are mobile telephone use, seat belts, careless driving, excess speed, and I always forget the last one, speeding. So they're the fatal 5, okay? But when we come to road traffic collisions, whether they're fatal, serious or minor, sometimes we pick up on contributory factors, and they can be road issues. So if we go to a road traffic collision on a road, say for instance at a junction that's a giveaway junction, and we think actually this is a really busy road now and it will be better as a stop junction, then we liaise with DFI, we share that information and we say, do you know what, we think the design of this road or the layout could be improved to improve road safety. That's a contributory factor. Things like, as areas have become more densely populated, sometimes the speed limit that's in place might be something that they might want to reconsider. That's entirely a matter for the DFI. We are not road engineers, but we have a degree of expertise and professional judgment, and we share that across. So it's the difference between causation factors, which absolutely are driver choices or inactions, overtaking, pulling out of junctions, speeding, not wearing seatbelts, using a mobile phone, or inattention and drug and drink driving. But there is a difference. The causation factors are almost entirely driver choices, pedestrian choices, rider choices, road user choices. Sounds quite simple, really, after the ground we've just covered in other questions.
Thank you. We are half an hour over. I'm going to let Alan come in for a 20-second supplementary.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about people jumping red lights. I drive the A2 between Bangor and Belfast every day, and in each journey I see 3 or 4 examples, blatant examples of people driving through red lights. Chief Constable, is the funding pressures that your organisation is under now, is it reducing your ability to detect these offences and other bad driving practices?
So I want to bring Mel in, but I can tell you that we've reduced our roads policing numbers quite considerably because as people retire from those roles, there's nobody to replace them with. This is not rocket science for all sorts of reasons. If we do not get the officers that we need, many of the issues that you're currently raising with us will just be amplified and more numerous. But Mel, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Not really much more to add, Alan. We have taken significant numbers out of roads policing, as we have across all departments across the service. Less numbers is less visibility on the roads. I think probably I share with most people on the roads that driver standards really seem to deteriorate after COVID. When everybody went back on the roads, people became much more inconsiderate, much more impatient. And to be honest, I could stand a police officer at a set of traffic lights on any of the lights on the A2 to Bangor all day long and just click people off who are jumping the lights because they're just too impatient to wait and stop. So you've got to have presence there for long periods of time in order to really, make an impact, because people go back to bad habits very quickly. What I also would say is what I think is really important is that the penalties imposed either through fixed penalty or back to court actually do act as a deterrence for future behaviours. So I know we've presented before about the difference in fines for speeding, either in Ireland or in England and Wales, and we're so out of kilter that it's the points that hurt, not the financial penalty. So for things like jumping a red light, when it really does hurt your pocket properly, you probably think twice about doing it again. So we're very much encouraging and working with DFI to make sure the fine that's imposed does hurt enough to act as a deterrent around future activity, because those jumping of lights do cause accidents.
Thank you. Normally I would try and wrap up, but the next 2 questions, and I'll ask members just to be very brief, and you in your response, you've referenced one of them. They're both items that have been in the public domain very recently. One is the Panorama programme, and Patrick, I think you have a question on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And you've just sort of previewed my question there, really, by mentioning that. But Chief Constable, you'll have been aware, and you may well have seen, but you'll certainly be aware of the Panorama documentary last night on the BBC. Absolutely horrendous scenes of people behaving badly because they thought they could get away with it. So I would appreciate, and I think the board would appreciate, your initial views on that. And in addition, and I suspect this will be a question that chief constables up and down the land will be getting today, do you have any concerns that we might see or have similar in behaviour? And given that, as we've discussed before, sergeants and inspectors, they can be said to either set the tone or certainly highly influence the tone for the culture in any police service. Is there more work that we need to do to ensure that we embed the right culture for the future in our police service?
Well, thanks for the question, Patrick. So I spent 28 years in the Metropolitan Police. I did watch the programme. I knew the programme was coming. I'd had conversations with the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. It's hard for me to describe how I felt last night when I watched it, other than at one point the programme actually went off. You may have been aware there was some technical problem. And I thought, thank goodness, because this is disgusting, it is vile, it is criminal. And I spent 28 years in that organisation, and I can tell you now, hand on heart, I never saw anything like that. Absolutely. And please don't forget, and this is not being defensive, every member of the Metropolitan Police Service today, police staff, police officers, will be feeling absolutely heartbroken by what they saw. I don't know the answer to the question about how the Met deal with that, by the way. Charing Cross Police Station has been involved in vile and unacceptable behaviour before. And it's a huge organisation of 30,000 odd police officers. But to say, well, I was angry would be an understatement about it. And what I hope happens is that for those that are involved in it, absolutely everything that can happen to them, and I shouldn't prejudice any proceedings, but does happen to them, because it's unforgivable what they've done around public trust. Around this organisation and similar behaviour, which is the second limb to your question. So what I will say is I look at the people around this table, actually, and in this policing board, I would hope the structures we've got in place and the people in this organisation would mean that the likelihood of us having behaviours like that are beyond remote. But I am not, and I don't think any of us are, complacent. And certainly we will have people in the organisation, because we are a reflection of society, that are people that we do not want in the organisation. But those sorts of behaviours, as I've been through this organisation at all levels in the last 2 years, I would be appalled, but I'd be incredibly surprised if we had that. And what I will say about this organisation, when you choose to apply for and join the PSNI, it's not like applying for the Met or West Midlands or Greater Manchester Police. Because we live in a post-conflict society, because of the residual issues around the distant Republican threat, because of so many factors here, families ostracising officers and staff, the threat against officers, the sense that officers might not be supported when they join the organisation with the nationalist community, I think we have a far more thoughtful and vocational organisation and workforce than I've seen in 42 years of policing. It doesn't protect us from having people that we don't want, but I think it is a factor that means it's highly unlikely that we get people like that, because some of the commentary about why they joined the job, I wouldn't recognise. And this organisation, remember, is relatively new. We'll celebrate our 25th birthday next year, but we've been through huge reform, and this is, to its core, a human rights-based organisation in a way that I don't think people probably around the board appreciate, that is so much different from elsewhere because of the backdrop, having worked both in England and in Northern Ireland. With regards to the point you make about sergeants and direct line supervision, the most important rank in policing, in my view, is sergeant. It is the most important rank. It's the person that first shapes you as a young police officer to determine actually what sort of officer you're going to be. So to see the supervisors act in the way that they did, and particularly one, was especially frustrating. We've just done a recruitment process with a considerable number of sergeants promoted, And I would hope our processes, and I'm happy to do a written response to this, and we will reflect on the programme and what more we need to do, by the way. We're not complacent. But I hope our processes would mean, again, that we would capture that. And after two final observations, the work we're doing around culture, the inclusion survey. So I think we're at about 43% now. There's a week left of the inclusion survey. And it's a bold thing to do, and it'll be fully published, will, I think, pull out any concerns that our officers and staff from protected characteristics have around inappropriate behaviours. I think there is a far more openness to reporting inappropriate behaviour, because I've seen that here in ways that I've not seen elsewhere, to the organisation, because nobody seemed to have reported those behaviours. They were happening on a day in and day out basis. And finally, the team PSNI events that we have, where we talk about our behaviours and we talk about our culture, again, I think provides me with some reassurance that I know the organisation that I'm working in. And for reasons of size and some of history, and by the way, something to do with where society is currently going, I think the Met have significant challenges in addressing some of those behaviours. The last thing actually I should say, and it came from the Angelina report, which again with the Casey report reflects on the challenges in policing, particularly some of the challenges the Met have had. We've looked at our vetting processes. We're going through recruitment at the moment. We hope to increase recruitment because of the recovery business case. We're constantly talking about how do we make sure that we're bringing in the right people with the right values. So we'll probably have a discussion together again as a result of that programme. And there will be a national piece of work at the foot of that programme to do everything we can collectively to make sure that we are seen to be doing everything we can. And I phoned Kieran, who's the chair of our Ethnic Minority Police Association yesterday, and Andy George, who are both at the National Black Police Association conference at the moment, to register how appalled I was with what I knew was going to come out of that programme. So there's not a lot more I can say. It's a day when I think we all wake up as police officers or member of the police family, that we feel let down and very uncomfortable, frankly. Okay.
Thank you, Chief Constable. That's largely what I hoped you would say, particularly about our service. I did notice this morning, and it's probably not to share all the stats, but Deputy Commissioner said that 1,500 people have been exited. I almost said executed there, which would have been the wrong phrase entirely, but exited over the past 3 years, which I don't know if that's 1,500 of the 33,000 attested people or the 46,000 workforce. Either way, it's still a pretty big percentage, and it's a lot bigger than I would expect ever to see in a service like ours. But thank you.
Thank you. Our final question comes from Peter in relation to the recent South Belfast incident, which seems to be shrouded in mystery.
Well, as you know, there was an incident in South Belfast at the Holy Lands a few days ago. It got a lot of news. So I was wondering two or three things. One, it created public concern. Can you give us a little bit more information to alleviate that concern, if it can be? Has there been engagement with people in the street or the streets around it to reassure them if they can be reassured? And how are the folk who were taken to hospital?
Thank you. I'll hand straight over to Davey. Davey contacted me on the night. I had communications with the Justice Minister actually, but Davey can give you a full explanation of what happened, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Conscious that there was some reporting, but as you say, probably that left some unanswered questions. So in essence, we got a call after 5 p.m. on the evening of the incident, indicating that ambulance service were turning out to a potential number of people unwell in a house. As a result of that, 4 people were eventually taken to hospital in a number of conditions, unresponsive. Some required CPR. So there was quite a significant incident in terms of our response to that, and the ambulance service response to that, and then the ED response to those 4 people. As that was ongoing, some of our people felt symptoms of feeling unwell. So we immediately declared that as a major incident, given that the scale, the gravity, the involvement of different agencies within the instructions around JESUP and the principles around major incidents. And as a result of that, 9 of our officers were taken to hospital suffering from some concerns around respiratory concerns, really. And we immediately put in place our CBRN kind of protocols in terms of potential noxious sort of incident. Those officers were decontaminated, and my thanks to ED personnel at Ulster Hospital in terms of their support for that, because that put significant strain on already under strain health service as well. We put a silver command in place. We put a duty inspector to the scene to manage that and to manage the kind of residents, etc., because it did require us to have a kind of exclusion zone while that was followed up. The fire service responded with their specialist equipment and confirmed that there was no detections in terms of any noxious equipment. And after a period of time, there was an investigative search of the house in respect of that. I don't want to go into the details around that clearly because that will be an ongoing investigation. But what I can say is the 4 people from the property have recovered well, is my understanding, and certainly were recovering well, and there's nothing life-threatening in terms of that. All the officers that were impacted by this incident, again, were decontaminated successfully, were under observation for a number of hours in hospital, and all were released by midnight that night without any other issues or concerns. And clearly we will take forward an investigation into some substances that were located in the house. Hopefully that provides you an overview around the incident.
Thanks, it does. I suppose it makes me think for people who live on the street, can you give them some reassurance that there is nothing for them to worry about from this?
Absolutely. This was very much in terms of close proximity to the house, to the people involved, and some suspicion around potential transmission of substances that may have been in the atmosphere of that house. Nothing further than that. And certainly the local district continue just to engage locally around those issues. And if there are further concerns within that community, I would ask them to make contact with us, and hopefully we can then have someone from a neighbourhood perspective that can perhaps explain or provide that local reassurance as well.
Thank you. And that concludes the questions for today. Could I thank you, Chief Constable, to you and your team for your answers, and to the members for your questions. I just want to apologise for the fact that this has been a marathon session, well over what we needed to cover, but I think we're all in agreement that we've covered a lot of ground, and some very good work has been done. Can I also apologise? A number of our political members have had to leave early. There's been comings and goings there on various other committees in Stormont, so that's the reason for their sharp exit. So for those watching online, thank you for your interest in policing. Tune in again on the 6th of November, and that'll be our November session. Thank you.